Okey-doke. Welcome everyone to our City Council study session of September 9th. And I know the clock here drives me nuts, but it does say 6 on my electronic stuff. We'll begin. So Englewood Trolley update is our first agenda item, and here Planning Manager Wade Burkholder will present to council. Thank you for being here.
Good evening, Mayor Olson, members of council. I wanted to take this opportunity to give you a brief update on where we stand with the trolley. As you know, we awarded a contract to MV Transportation in 2015, and with the clause we had 5 one-year renewals, and as of December 31st of this year, that contract expires. So what we did this summer was go out and advertise for a new request for proposal, RFP, for trolley services for the next 3 years. And we, in that RFP, we actually asked for cost estimates for other types of extended service. We asked to price out an additional route to see what the options might be for the city moving forward. I do have here broken out the base service for 2020, and then the base service plus each additional extra that we requested for them to give us proposals for. So if you see, the base service is $379,000, and if we added a Saturday service, for example, to the Monday through Friday, 6:30 to 6:30, that cost would be $423,000. So you can see we did a couple scenarios. We added base service plus some extended additional hours for Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday from 6:30 a.m. to 8 p.m. and Thursday, Friday, Saturday from 6:30 a.m. to 9 p.m. And you'll see these costs obviously will go up as we add more service. The base service plus a secondary route attached to your council communication was that route that we proposed, and it was just a discussion amongst staff as to where we might go and what we might do. So there wasn't any real hard and fast formula that we used to propose this route. It was just trying to get people down to the rec center and up and through the Oxford Light Rail Station and whatnot. And if we did that, if we added that secondary route to the base service, you're looking at about $740,000, and so on and so forth. I wanted to let you know that we are proposing in the 2020 budget just the base service, but if council has any interest in further looking at some of these extra add-ons, extra times, extra routes, we certainly can do that. But what's reflected in the 2020 budget request is just the base service, which is what we operate now. The 2020 cost for operations is $411,079. That is up from the 2018 operating costs, which was $386,292. So that is what we did with the RFP. You will be seeing a contract, professional services agreement coming to you probably in late October for extending the service with MV Transportation. They will be our recommended provider going into the future years based on their proposal. So I just wanted, as I said, to get that information in front of you so you had as much information as you could on the trolley and what it might look like if we wanted to expand hours or expand routes and that sort of thing. Just wanted to mention also that we have been researching the Flex Ride or Link on Demand service, which essentially is a non-fixed bus route. People actually call for service and they try to link customers with destinations. So you might have 3 or 4 people needing a ride to Swedish Medical, so the bus will actually come to you. The city of Lone Tree successfully has implemented that, and we've been talking with them just to get ideas for, moving forward with our trolley in the future years. So that's also an option that's out there that we're just kind of researching right now. But with that brief overview, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have of me.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Wink.
Thank you, Mayor. I do appreciate the consideration of extending the route to include both Englewood light rail stations and some more areas in between the two. With regard to, so first question, with regard to the flex ride option, is that what it's called?
Yes.
Where am I?
The
Yes.
flex-
Flex ride. Did you consult with any municipalities that maybe piloted it and didn't quite see the success that Longmont saw to have a little comparison? Or did you speak with other
We-
successful cities?
We have not spoken with any other cities other than Lone Tree.
Mm-hmm.
So all of our other research thus far has been, just researching online and whatnot.
Even cities outside Colorado?
We have not.
Okay,
Yep.
very good. Based on what I know right now, and given the pilot of extended hours didn't really show justification for that, I might be interested in looking at an addition of a weekend day. It's hard to say that without any data that shows some ability to predict whether or not, what ridership will look like.
Okay.
But I think that base service plus additional extended hours is certainly not high on my list of items I might think seriously about. And I love that extended route. If at all we could pay for it, I love it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you so much for putting this together. It's really nice to see the different options and the costs associated.
Can you pull it up a little closer
Sure,
to you?
sorry. I'm really surprised that the expanded hours didn't get as much traction as we anticipated, because I had a lot of folks ask me about it, so I'm surprised
Okay.
that we didn't get the ridership. I would be curious to see, and there's no really, I guess, way to kind of like what Councilmember Wink said in advance to know if a Saturday option would be used or would not be used. So I don't know. I would love to see that, but I don't know how we can justify taking another stab in the dark without kind of guaranteeing that we would have the ridership. That said, I would also love to see the expanded route, although I think we would have to do a lot of work to make sure that folks know it's available. So I think right now probably we're okay to stick with the base service, but I think as this city center redevelops and the city expands, it would be good to keep these numbers in mind and possibly include the transportation advisory in on some of these discussions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councilmember Barentine.
Thank you very much for the work that you did. I echo what the other council members said, that it was nice to see all the options on there. I have 2 questions. One was the extended hours, I thought, was to partner more with Swedish and be able to go into the parking facility that they were doing. So I am kind of confused why it wouldn't be more palatable to them, because that's what, we're partnering with them, right?
There's no official agreement with them. The initial idea was to try to catch their shift change,
Right.
but those numbers just never materialized.
But the numbers materialize for them to go ahead and do that parking structure over there? So they've got more people that are willing to, because they were trying to pick up the people who were even parking at the structure to come back to the hospital. So if we could just get a little bit more information on that. My concern with the extended route going to the other light rail station is that I'm not sure we'd have to do a lot of advertising, because there's a price cutoff, isn't there, for light rail between Oxford and Englewood, which would make the Oxford station a much more palatable place for people to get on rather than Englewood. So I'm very concerned about shoving a ton more parking into that area.
I see.
And that's what that would encourage. And going, and then kind of, trying to a little bit more urbanize the industrial area, which I think could create just additional parking problems. They already have huge parking problems there now, but when you've got a price cutoff point, people trying to save a couple of dollars, I think that we're going to encourage something that may be some unintended consequences there. So if you could look into that as well, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
I think Councilmember Ciara, and then I'll come back to Mayor Pro Tem and then Councilmember Wink.
So in terms of our share, is it always $85,000, or at least with the base service for this year is 85,000, or is there a sliding scale, or what's the math on that?
This year is 85,000. It's based on the lost fare figure, in which every September, October, this time of year, there is a survey done of the ridership, and RTD creates a lost fare that if they could charge a fee, or if they did charge a fee, that's the amount that they would collect. So that's done every year. It changes every year based on what they find in that survey and what they would lose in fares by not charging.
Okay. And then secondly, in terms of the extended hours and just the additional base service, when are we expecting that to actually materialize? Since I'm just wondering, in terms of Synergy Medical going up and that opening, are we looking at 2020? Well, 2021, 2022, what's the time frame where we expect additional ridership?
We are currently looking at 2023 as the next evaluation, as some of those new projects come online, like Synergy. So that and the redevelopment of this property and whatnot. So that'll be the next look at numbers and things like that.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. I appreciate you bringing this forward and looking into all of this. I do have another question along the lines of Councilmember Barentine. I know that the CEO of Swedish said that they were interested in partnering with the city if it could accommodate travel during their shift change hours. And so were any of those conversations ever pursued? I mean, this was probably a year and a half ago.
Those conversations are ongoing. What we need to take into account that our partnership with RTD is for the base time, so 6:30 to 6:30, or it was till 8 during this trial. Anything outside those boundaries, RTD will not participate in. So that's where we've come into the wall, so to speak, is to trying to find, and see what the costs were to expand those either earlier. Some of the conversations with Swedish, they would like the service to start at 4:30 or 5 a.m. And so it's been trying to figure out what we ask for and finding a number that we would come to council to request, because that would be on the city's dime in order to slide those times either way.
Well, in my conversations with Mr. Hammett, he is looking at, I believe he would pick up the total cost if it is less than the other options he is pursuing. Okay. So even though, that is a possibility that you would check with him on that. I think it boils down to him for what is going to be least expensive for Swedish to do, but if it's something that in partnering with us, they pay for the difference, and we continue to pay the base, that's a possibility.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilmember Wink.
Thanks, Mayor. So approximately how much did the pilot program for the extended hours, has it cost us so far monetarily?
It's cost the city nothing. RTD picked up
All of it.
all of it. And They monitor success by the number of 11 boardings per hour, and we were somewhere around 5. So we were really low, and so
Thank you.
that's why.
I'm asking you because I'm considering if cost weren't a factor to us as we look at potentially extending some of the routes, maybe another short period of a pilot could be helpful in giving some indication.
Right.
I'm not sure, but at least it could give us a little bit of data that we could use to make the decision to going that route. Also, may I ask another question, Mayor? The lost fare, so how exactly is it calculated? It's not aggregated across all of RTD territory, correct? You're saying after the survey's administered every fall,
Right.
there's a calculation of
So
fare that would be, I mean, it materializes into 81-something thousand for
85.
us?
Correct.
But do you know how they measure, or geography-wise, do you know how
Yeah,
they
that-
split that up?
That I don't.
Do you understand what I'm
know.
asking?
Yes, I know they break it out between adult, child, pass holders, non-pass holders. So they figure all the different categories of person.
Yep.
But geographically, I don't know if they're figuring, going to Union Station or what.
That's what I was asking. I might be asking a very simple
don't.
question. I was wondering if they took lots of survey information, data, and gave us the Englewood-related route calculations with a little bit of math and...
I'm sure we can find that
We
out
can
as to
find
what
that
they're, I
out.
think I've seen it before, I don't remember
Or
what
is
it
it just a
was, but it
big,
made sense when I saw it, but I have no, I can't
broad-
remember. This is
Really?
way a long time
Sure.
ago.
I think we're going to have to add that to the mix. It was always my understanding that the lost fare was only what they would lose on that route. What people would have paid if there was a paying bus for that area,
Okay.
for where they were going.
Okay.
Hey, we're
The f-
getting a thumbs up from Mr. Power back here,
Okay.
so if you want to come up and add in what you know. Okay,
I-
great.
I don't think that's going to help my question at this point, but I mean, once you get the formula, that's fine. The last time, if memory serves, it was around $75,000. That's a $10,000 increase. That's a lot of ridership. And so I would like to see that because how they calculated that, because an increase in $10,000 over just a few years, when we're getting feedback all over the metro area that the ridership is kind of decreased, that I would like to see that so
Okay.
that we can justify that additional 10,000.
No problem.
And in the meantime, you're going to have to answer her question anyway and show the formula. So, thank you.
Thank you. I would like to weigh in too. The actual ridership for RTD is up, but the light rail is down. And so I think we're seeing the same thing the rest of the city is seeing. Dr. Cog, we've talked about it quite a bit. They're not sure why the light rail is so far down right now, but buses are up, interestingly enough. And circulators tend to really go well, especially if you've got things happening like we have that are going on now. I appreciate the analysis that you've done here and the different options. My choice would be to stay with the base for now and go back to Swedish. Swedish sometimes says they'd like to do something and then they get lost in the details and haven't really produced. We've asked them for some other things where that's happened, so I'm sure it's just a matter of keeping it on the radar and really seeing if there's something there. It might be Craig has something. I know the shift thing is problematic because we can't extend to the late night and to 4:30 in the morning, so maybe it just won't work. But it'd be good to have someone involved with, I think Brad Power has some ongoing group with them as well, so maybe that would be the way to increase it.
Sure.
But I sure appreciate that we have it. I think it's one of the best things. I wrote it this summer. I try to write it once every summer, and I did it this summer, and it was kind of fun. I rode from here over to the Meridian and then walked home. It's really just such a wonderful mixture of people that are going to work, that are going home, that are, don't live in the city and are going to work and then leaving and going. It's just such a fun, and it's great use. So, Councilmember Cuesta.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Burkholder. Just so I took the note correctly, and I see it would be on the base level for 2020, 411,000 and some change, and it was 386,000 in 2019.
That was a 2018 figure.
2018, thank you.
Yes.
Do you have the 2019 as well?
I don't on me, but I can easily get that.
The 2018 gives me the idea. And I too would stick with the base service at this point. I think any potential partnerships with Swedish should certainly be explored. And a lot of it is that any of those extended services fall strictly into Englewood without any offset from RTD. That makes it a tough pill to swallow financially. I agree, great work, and it'd be something that'd be awfully nice to have if we have the funding for that sometime in the future. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thanks for all your work on this.
Thank you.
Keep up the bus. I love the colors on it, too. Next up is the Budget Advisory Committee, giving us a report. The members are here, both, I think, chairs, co-chairs. Introduce yourselves both. And they're presenting on the Budget Advisory Committee's 2019 annual report and would like to discuss with council any feedback that we have for them. So because these are really sensitive mics, could you sit on the third one? Yeah. And you have to just get right up there into it. So if you can pull them closer to you, I think maybe even we probably might not have been hearing. So go ahead and introduce who the three of you are, and I know you might tag team a bit, which is fine. Oh, we got to turn it on. I'll turn mine off.
Suzanne Dirksen. I am the chair of the Budget Advisory Committee, and I'm joined by Steve Ward and Chelsea Nunnenkamp. Joel Moore and Donna Woods were unavailable this evening. So our 2019 annual report was drafted by our 2018-2019 Budget Advisory Committee, but we've had some turnover. We have some new members who did have the opportunity to review the report. So thank you for the opportunity to share our ideas and thoughts with you. We have 3 items for discussion, much more abbreviated than last year where I think we gave you 5 or 7. The first is an adjustment to the reserve policy. The current reserve policy states that the city will put aside 2 months or 16.7% of reserves each year, or excuse me, revenues each year into reserves, which works out in times of economic boom like we're facing now, but we need to be prepared for fiscal cliffs and economic decline. So with that in mind, the Budget Advisory Committee is asking council to consider a sliding reserve policy that will allow the city to put more into reserves during times of economic boom and reserve less in times of economic decline. That will help stabilize expenditures over the long term and improve budget planning for capital projects that tend to be very costly. That is going to bring me to my second talking point, capital expenditures and deferred maintenance. We're all familiar with the issues that we're having with stormwater drainage. That's a great example of what we're about to speak to. We'd like to reiterate that deferred maintenance tends to be more costly than repairs. So we'd like council to consider a proactive approach to capital maintenance. Doing so mitigates the risk of catastrophe, broken water mains, what have you. And as I mentioned before, planned maintenance is always less costly than emergent repairs. In addition, being on top of maintenance will minimize disruption to city staff, citizens, and operations. Personnel can focus on their day-to-day responsibilities instead of stopping and diverting their attention to repairs and fixing problems that could have been avoided. Finally, we'd like to suggest that council request RFPs for single hauler trash providers. We have several reasons that we are in favor of converting to a single hauler waste system. Naturally, it will reduce wear and tear on our city streets and on our alleys. And again, you can refer back to our comments regarding deferred maintenance in that regard. We do believe that it will reduce the cost of tracking services to residents and businesses. Naturally, it will reduce the noise pollution on trash collection days. Personally, I'd much rather hear one truck run down my street than 11. We also believe it will improve accountability from service providers. They're much more likely to be accountable to a large account like the city than to small accounts like individual residences. We also believe it will reduce the number of complaints to code enforcement for large items dumped in alleys like sofas and mattresses. Residents and businesses would be required to utilize trash collection. We know some people are diverting that policy now. And some providers will likely offer concierge services, which will also reduce some of those large dumps in the alleys. We've had informal conversations with fellow citizens, and people are largely in favor of it. Personally, I'm a proponent of process improvement and lean methodology, and I think converting to a single hauler trash service is aligned with those principles. So those are our 3 talking points. All 3 of us are here to answer questions.
Thank you so much. Member Cuesta, were you starting? Well, kick us off if you have something. Go ahead.
As I read through the sliding scale yesterday, I'm not sure if I was fully grasping it. Can I have you guys go into a little bit further detail on it?
Sure. So this piece of the report was one of my sort of philosophical ideas that I came across. And the question of reserves is, what are reserves for? I believe that reserves are to ensure the continuity of government and stability during lean times. So a solid reserve policy that says we always have 16.9% of our revenue in reserve all the time does not accomplish that task, because any council that dips into reserves has to be violating the policy. So instead of going with a flat reserve policy of 16.9% or whatever the actual rate is, what we propose is a ratcheting and sliding reserve policy. So you have a reserve target that you set, and a baseline might be 16 point whatever percent that we have now. And in times when there's economic prosperity, or boom times like now, where we're bringing in revenue far in excess of what was anticipated, you take a fixed percentage of that, say 50%, and you send it straight to the reserves. And the other 50%, you put in the next year's budget for what we would use as one-time expenses, capital maintenance expenses. Once you do that, and the economy starts moving, as it always does, downward, you have a large pool of money that you can draw on to ensure stability and backfill to maintain a level of service during economic decline. Now, that pool is not infinite, of course, so as you draw down on it, you might draw down for a year or two, and things might not be getting better. You would have to make adjustments, but we can delay the shock from year to year, and we can make thoughtful use of the money that we take from the citizens in tax dollars and fees.
If I'm understanding correctly, during the boom years, we're going to overpay into it.
Well-
And then during the lean years, we would pay less into it, set the target lower, and then we'd be backfilling from those boom years. So we had the extra set aside.
Not exactly. What we're talking about here is money above revenue projection.
Okay.
So one of the challenges with the budget cycle is we plan the budget nearly a year in advance of those revenues coming in. We approve the budget before the next year, so we're working on it right now, and we're projecting things that'll happen 365 days from now. There's no way to predict when the economy goes down or up. So this past year we took in, I don't know the exact number, but something along the lines of $9 million more than what we projected for revenues. Again, ballpark figure. So in a year when that happens, because the economy is going so well, we sweep some of that money automatically into the reserve. And likewise, what can be more shocking is when we project $50 million in revenue and we only get 48. Then we have $2 million to fill. But if we hold it in reserves, knowing that we intend to spend it in a lean year, that can help us better balance the budget in future years without that shock of the ebb and flow of revenues.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of that figure, it's 16.7 now, and that's the scale that slides. So it would be anticipated the council would make that decision in reaction to just where things are economically and how they're seeing the money roll in. Because you're right, we're forecasting out way down the road, it's difficult to tell. But that council would have that ability on the fly to change that threshold.
Presumably, yes. I mean, if we started with the baseline, you have to start somewhere.
Sure.
At 16.7%, and then we could, through policy, and there are some kinks to be worked out here, but we might say, when we get down to 14% of reserves, we need to anticipate potentially making some cuts in the next year. When we get down to 10% of reserves, then we really need to have a conversation with the citizens about whether we want to cut services or we want to ask for additional revenue.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated reading these. I think I really align with a lot of what was recommended, so that's it was nice to see that. I really like the idea of the reserve sliding scale. I think we would have to figure out the best way to do it, and because it seems like it would also have to be maybe ebb and flow throughout the year instead of one set number. I'm not sure, but I 100% agree with the deferred maintenance, and we're constantly dealing with things that are breaking and all these urgent repairs, which are super expensive, which is one reason that I love that we're discussing the single trash hauler topic, because we have an option with that to be proactive and make a change that is going to be better for the future of our city and not operate from a place of panic and chaos because something's broken. So I love that we're talking about that now. But my question relates to the capital expenditures and deferred maintenance. We have so many needs, and obviously we have, X amount of dollars. How would you suggest we go about prioritizing how we would fund? Obviously, ideally we would fund everything at the levels that it needs to be funded. But if we only have a certain amount of money, how would you suggest that we start prioritizing those projects or things?
Yeah, the first thing we do is encourage council to work with staff to take an inventory of the capital assets that need attention.
Sure, and I think we're working on getting an asset management system, but in lieu of that now, I don't know, sometimes it's hard to decide where to start,
Yeah.
Certainly.
I'm a proponent of return on investment, which activities are going to yield the greatest return.
So the largest impact to the largest number of folks in our community.
And one of the challenges that we have as a committee is that we're restricted by virtue of our enabling ordinance from making specific capital recommendations to council. That belongs under the charter to planning and zoning. So as far as any specific projects are concerned, I have lots of ideas about those, but I cannot put them in the Budget Advisory Committee's report because I follow the city's charter, and the charter says I can't do that.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Cuesta, your light is, that's okay. You can't see it. Any others? Go ahead, Councilmember Sierra. It is on, but it's just so faint. Sorry.
Thank you very much for the reports. I'm going to go back to the sliding scale. Did you guys give any consideration on what the top level and the bottom level would be as just a recommendation?
Good question. We actually didn't work out those details. One of the things we tried to do to achieve balance was suggest that perhaps sweeping half of the excess on a year-to-year basis was a good place to start. So that didn't set a top level. It's a good question given how much we need to do as a city right now. 25%, 50%, whatever. My bottom line suggesting that policy, and I think this committee's bottom line in suggesting that policy, is that a fixed number saying you must always have this much in reserve requires any council to violate policy to use that money. And that, I don't believe, serves the people. Money is only useful if it can be used. This is money that came from the citizens, and to put it towards the use, even if the use is something as idea-like as ensuring the stability of government, it is what I would like to see done.
Right. And I guess the second question that I have to this is, I believe when we set the bottom tier, I think that's more of a conversation that we need to have with staff, primarily with Director of Finance, Director Sobota, because I believe when I first joined council, when they stated that, our reserve policy is 16.7, but TABOR is actually much lower than that. So we're just setting that policy based off of it's just our council policy. But I believe part of the benefit of having a higher reserve policy was that it did allow us to get lower interest rates whenever we did leverage or have to go out and request a loan for whatever reason. So I think that would be have a conversation, but I guess going back to the higher level, do you believe the 7 million that we're projected to have at the end of the year is too high of a level considering the needs of the city today?
I think that 7 million is 7 million above the target. And yes, at this point, I believe 7 million above target is far, far too much, especially under the current policy. That $7 million should be spent towards some publicly beneficial purpose.
Thank you. Councilmember Berengine.
I just want to clarify, because it keeps getting stated that it's forcing council to violate policy, but council sets that policy, and I think Councilmember Cuesta, Sierra, I apologize. You are correct. Yeah, that's true. It goes both ways. That the policy is already kind of a sliding scale, because if there's some emergency, we have the opportunity to change that policy. Actually, on the fly, mid-year, as we're going through something, if that issue happened. So it's not like we're violating it, or the next council would violate the policy. The next council would actually set the policy, and the policy is something that we can work within on the budget during a year as something comes up and emergencies happen, and that's exactly what's happened. So I just wanted to make sure that there's a clarification on that a policy that's set is not set in stone, nor does it transfer from one council to the next, as the policy is set by each individual council. So I just wanted to make sure we clarified that.
You are correct that the policy is not codified in the Englewood Municipal Code, but if we say that each time the rules don't fit the situation, we change the rules, that doesn't provide for the kind of stability that I'm suggesting.
No, I'm actually saying that I believe that the policy allows us to do exactly what you're saying, so that when we have an emergency, we have gone back and made decisions in past years to go ahead and take some of that reserve. And certainly the access that's coming after any 1 year, if the revenue is more, automatically at the end of the year it goes to the capital improvements. So I believe there's a little bit of that already kind of built into the system. So yeah, and you are correct, policies are not codified in the charter.
I think it's two different ways of looking at it
Sure.
and saying it. I think they are opposite. But Councilmember Sierra.
I'm not sure if this is really a question for the BAC, but obviously when you looked at this, you were looking at this from the general fund perspective. But do we also have, does the Water and Sewer Board also look at the budget or fees or just the reserves that may be needed in terms of future maintenance, future capital expenses? I'm just wondering is there somebody that's actually looking at that aspect of it? Because we have citizen group here made up of, or the BAC made up of a citizen group that's looking at the general fund, but is there any other citizens that are looking at other aspects of the infrastructure and enterprise funds? Because you're not making a recommendation on the enterprise funds by any
No.
means. And I'm just curious if there's...
No, we don't have a group. The staff do that. Financial people within those contexts do that. We can maybe hear from Director Sobota when she comes up if you want to hear more about how they do that. Were you finished? Sorry. Yeah. I started out on council when we had a 8%. Do you remember that?
Yep.
8 and 9%. And we were, of course, in dire straits, and we made it. But we were pulling from reserves in order to make things work. And Jenny back there is shaking her head yes. And so I think we have had this ongoing conversation about what's the right percentage, and then it moved up to 16, had to be 2 full months. I remember when that was brought up, and I thought about what would this mean in the long term. So when you were looking at all this, did you see any other cities as examples for this that you thought were creating some better processes for the future?
So far as I know, this suggestion is unique. I didn't look at other cities' budgets, but I have been examining the revenue and expenditures of other cities. And I can say comparably, Englewood is very, very lean on a per capita basis if you analyze general fund revenues and expenditures in particular, compared to other cities.
Who did you compare to on those?
I have looked at Denver. On the expenditure side, there's a roughly $300 to $500 difference in how much Denver spends per capita compared to how much Englewood spends. I looked at Littleton and Greenwood Village, which of course is a lot more financially prosperous than Englewood is as far as the ability to operate and the amount of money they're bringing in and spending. Cherry Hills Village, Sheridan, and then I think I'm missing one of our neighbors.
Centennial?
I did look at Centennial, but Centennial's kind of an odd duck because the numbers did not match any of the others. They weren't even close. They were somewhere in the 50% range.
That's because they contract so much.
I'm not sure exactly what it is. I spend my time as much as possible studying Englewood's budget, so when I see something that baffles me about another city, I don't spend a lot of time trying to figure out why. So those are, the nearby municipalities that kind of set the standard. The difference being Englewood and Denver are the only two full-service cities on that list. So we provide police, fire, library, and parks and recreation all under one umbrella. Littleton pays into a fire district. Littleton pays into, in a lot of areas, into the South Suburban Parks and Recreation District. Greenwood Village, of course, pays into a library district in a lot of places, a Parks and Recreation District in some places, and a fire district citywide. Centennial, of course, as you mentioned, does special districts for almost everything. And of course, Sheridan has areas with a Parks and Recreation District and a library district. So Englewood's lack of special districts is one of the challenges. We have to provide everything to our citizens under one general fund. And that can make it look like we are spending more than we actually are, we're taking in more than we are. But the truth is, we're providing more for less than anybody else around.
Thank you. That alone is a helpful summary of what you're finding. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank you all for the great work you're doing, and I have loved being the liaison to this committee because I've been learning a lot about the budget, and I appreciate all that you do. Thank you very much.
Great. Any other questions? I thank you so much for the work you've been doing over the last year and to create this. It was a very nice, succinct report again this year, and not easy to pull all that together and make it so distinct. And I'm really interested in having more conversations about reserves, so I appreciate you bringing that up again.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Our next big agenda item then is to go into the 2020 budget. Information and direction tonight, and our Finance Director Maria Sobota is here. We have a PowerPoint that she's going to walk us through, and I'm sure that we have some questions that just got sort of stimulated in this last round that you can help us with, and then we've got lots more to come.
Okay, good evening, Mayor and City Council. Of course, I'm Maria. Good to see you again. Are you sick of seeing me yet talking about the budget? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, we're getting
I
there.
asked, so that you had a new face at the table too, I asked Jenny to join in the event that there's questions specific that she might be able to research with her computers or going through it. Before I begin, I would like to talk about the question regarding reserves. I want to make sure that Council is aware that you can make decisions regarding the unappropriated balance at any time that's above and beyond that 16.7%, even though it's not called a reserve, so to speak. And also, when we were being rated, as we were talking about going into bonding and we were doing the refinancing of the water bonds, the 16.7% was considered a gold standard in the eyes of the bond market. So we did receive good feedback on that. I think those were the two things that I wanted to address before we move forward with the budget presentation.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so we are here tonight to provide you with an update to the proposed 2020 budget. This is our final discussion before the public hearing. I did want to mention that there are two documents that are currently online, the Revenue Book and the South Platte Water Renewal Partner Book. We are working very quickly to actually have the budget book also uploaded. It is ready to go, but to be perfectly honest, we're not certain why it hasn't been, so we're trying to reach the individual that was supposed to post it, and my goal is to have that posted yet today before midnight, so we'll work feverishly on that. We do have paper copies available. We brought copies of the revenue and the South Platte book. We also have 4 copies of the budget book available tonight. It's very thick, so we wanted to ask if council, after this presentation, would be willing to see only the electronic copy. If you want a paper copy, we can provide up to 4 tonight. And then if there are more council members that would like a paper copy, we'd be happy to get that for you tomorrow. Certainly with the final budget book, we print as many as possible, but because this is a proposed book, we thought that was a more conservative way to go about it, considering the printing costs. But again, we can get you one tomorrow if one is not available for everybody tonight and they want it. Okay. I also wanted to give you an update. Council graciously approved the purchase of a software called Wakiva, and part of the process this budget season was to implement Wakiva and in the creation of the budget book, and it really is going to be a time saver in the future. Unfortunately, for Jenny's sake, there was a lot of work this year to actually set it up, but as you recall, one of the things that Wakiva addressed was accuracy throughout the document, and so if you ask us to make changes to the budget, what will happen is, obviously we can make it in the financial system, but what was happening last year is it had to be changed 5 places in the book, and that was a manual process. Now it's tied to our financial system, so when the change is made, it automatically flows to the budget book. So I think it'll be a huge time saver, at least I hope it will, because Jenny has been working feverishly in making sure that we got the implementation done this year. So thank you very much for your work on that, Jenny. We all really appreciate that. I also, because this is right before the public hearing, this has taken a lot of time and effort of the entire staff to put together. I mean, I'm here talking about the budget, but certainly we would not be where we are today without the cooperation of all the department directors in providing information to us. I certainly feel more educated than I did a year ago when I was here for the end of the first budget with my employment at the city of Englewood. And everyone has worked really hard to bring together a lot of information throughout the past several months. We've been meeting, I think, since February, talking about revenues and capital requests, and then we talked a little bit more about expenses during the workshop. And what we'll be talking about tonight is information that we've previously shared with you. We're updating it, and we have, I think as we've gone through each of the presentations, we've tried to show you what changes we've made to the previous decks so that you were able to follow it. And then what I'll be sharing is not only a high overview tonight that's included in the presentation, but then also more details about the final changes that have been made in order to balance the budget. So we are bringing forth a balanced budget tonight, and we're very happy to tell you that. So with that, we'll get started. Oh, and I should ask, is it okay to wait for questions till the end, or how would we want to do that?
Yeah, have everybody earmark what you want, and we'll go back through and,
Okay.
yeah.
Great. So I talked about this. I mean, this is the process we followed. So I'll say, specifically moving forward, what we have in the next couple of weeks, we have the public hearing next week, and then based on any feedback that we receive, we would have a final budget discussion on the 23rd to finalize any changes, with the intent of bringing forth the ordinances in early October for your review and approval. Throughout our conversations, we have captured the following themes that we have discussed not only within the study sessions, but also the regular sessions and perhaps some public comment along the way as well during some of the open comment period. And certainly I think one of the most important messages we received is that the desire of council was for us to bring forth a balanced proposed 2020 budget. We also have had so many conversations regarding improving the storm drainage system, and we've started to make some progress. In fact, some of the the comments on the slides refer to the loan that you approved going forward, and we will be putting forth the RFP. We're hoping by the end of this week to ask a firm to help us identify storm water drainage rates across municipalities in preparation to think about what a fee increase might be. Looking forward to bonding, supporting our bonding efforts in 2020. So that'll go out this week. So part of those monies we had said we would use for that, we are planning on putting out that RFP this week. We've also talked a lot about fixing the alleys and maintaining streets, and as we go through the presentation, you'll see that there are some funds identified for that within this budget. Addressing code enforcement. Providing emergency management. Certainly that was something that was passed, and those costs are included, not only a portion of them are included in 2019, but also going into 2020. Ensure well-planned redevelopment. Continue to provide effective online services, so you'll see some requests for a webmaster. So part of that cost will be to provide those online services or continue to improve those. To keep council and citizens informed. So, you know, I guess I'll say to this, we'll certainly be reviewing a lot of the things that we've already talked about in the budget changes that we made in order to balance the budget. But we had an opportunity to look at some additional citywide initiatives that City Manager Lewis will be talking about with you tonight that are actually additions. So he's going to take a moment to talk about some additions that you have probably read about in the packet, but we haven't talked about those just yet in a public setting. Upgrade our parks and improve our recreation services. And of course, consider trash hauler options. We just talked about that. So as I mentioned, we will review the updates that we've included in tonight's presentation and currently in our proposed budget that you'll be reviewing over the next week before the public hearing. And the primary budget adjustments that I'll ask you to focus on. We actually had an increase in our property tax assessment revenue, not the rate, but the assessment based on the overall value of properties in the Englewood community. I will give you an update on the negotiated benefit rate. Currently, we do not have a contract in place just yet, but we were able to negotiate a rate that is included in this package of 1.25% with one of the vendors, and we're using that as our example. If a different decision is made, of course, that will have a different impact on the budget. So I want you to be aware of that. Unfunded departmental budget requests and other reductions. This is probably the bulk of the presentation tonight. So we have brought forth budget requests since May, and in an effort to balance the budget, the department staff has gone back and they have reviewed each of the items that have been brought forth and are coming back tonight with some suggestions as the items that they have actually removed from their budgets in an effort to balance. And as I mentioned, City Manager Lewis will talk about citywide initiatives, his recommendations for some programs that he would like funded as part of our overall recommendation to City Council. So as we get started, I wanted to let everyone know where we were on August 5th and where we are today. Beginning with our 2019 estimated year-end balance, you can see that it's increased slightly. 19.2 million is estimated to be our fund balance, and again, that's above our reserve policy and our additional Tabor reserve. Our estimated revenues are slightly higher, and I'll get into the detail regarding that number. It was 52.6. Our revenues were 52.6. Now we are at 53.1. Our proposed expenditures, when we talked in August, 54.2 million and currently sitting at 53.1 million. So our estimated year-end fund balance actually increased from our original proposed budget from 17.5 million to 19.2 million. And you can see that what we're estimating, again, above policy is 8.6 million now, no longer the 7 million that was discussed a little bit earlier. So keep that in mind as we're going through this. And then this is where I make the note that this is on an unneeded basis. The fund balance will be decreased incrementally up to $3 million for the loan to the storm drainage fund that we were just talking about. And so that's part of the balance that you're talking about, or that we're talking about here. It's from the LTAR. This provides similar information, it's just more detailed, and it points out what our estimated uses, sources and uses are in 2019 again, versus our proposed sources and uses, so you can make comparisons, although I'm going to be talking about those relative to percentage increases as we move forward. So this is where we were originally when we brought forth the budget on August 5th. And this is where we are at in total. So you can see what has changed not only in 2019 as far as our estimated sources, which is in line with the information that we've been sharing, you know, where we're at with revenues year to date in July, and our estimated uses and what our available balance would be at the end of the year. And then moving forward into column G and H, those proposed sources and uses that I just spoke about. So our general fund revenues, I wanted to actually go back to talking a little bit about the components of our general fund revenues. And I would say, you know, we've included information regarding the enterprises and other funds, but the primary focus of our conversation tonight, because we had conversations regarding the enterprises on the 12th of August, I believe. We've had a lot of conversations. We're focusing on the general fund because of the changes that we're bringing forth for you to consider tonight. So of our $53.1 million of revenue in the budget for next year, approximately 8.7% is property tax. Approximately 62% of our revenues are sales and use tax. Our franchise fees, 6.6%. Licenses and permits, 2.8%. Intergovernmental revenue, 2.3%. Charges for services, 5.7. Our recreation program fees, 5.1. And our contribution from component units, 3.1. And all of other revenue, as identified on the right-hand side of the page by individual percentages, is 4.1%. Overall, our proposed sources of funds, $53.1 million, is 3.9% above our 2019 estimate. There are no additional taxes or fees included. So we talked during previous conversations about the 7% increase in sewer. That is the only fee that's proposed, but not as part of this, okay? Our expenditures, you can see the total is $53.1 million. It represents approximately a 1.5% increase over 2019's estimate, and it is below the Colorado Consumer Price Index of 2.2%. Included in this, and this is a change, we have included 3.5% salary increase for all employees, union and non-union, and I'll talk about the dollar impact of that as we move forward through all of the changes. So that is one of the changes that we did make. We had included 3.5 for union. We have now increased it to 3.5 for union and non-union. And in our research in discussing this with other cities, this is at par or slightly below what other cities are actually proposing to their city councils for their salary increases for 2020. I also wanted to comment on this slide, and we'll get into a little bit more detail. We have included FTE ads in the budget, and we can talk a little bit about the specific ads themselves. In the general fund, there are 9.9 FTE increases. However, not all of those are new bodies per se, or new people. We're going to talk about those specifics as part of the details we go through, okay? And it's we've also made some changes in the number of FTEs we're requesting from previous versions. So in general, I can tell you that we are asking for 5 additional FTEs, and we can talk a little bit about what those positions are as we talk about the details. Those are full-time employees. We also are asking for 4 part-time positions, the equivalent of 2 FTEs. And we'll talk about the details about where those individuals are being requested to support. The remainder of the changes are adjustments that have been made for individuals that are currently here, but they're working a little bit more. Like, for example, in the courts, there's an individual that increased 0.25%. For example, in the city attorney's office, that one of the assistant city attorneys is increasing from a part-time to a full-time position. So those are other sorts of changes that have happened with FTEs that are impacting that overall, the overall number of FTEs. I also wanted to talk about capital funds. We included in this deck the total that we are requesting. It is approximately 7.1 million, and you can see the proposed sources and uses, and the fund balance of 1.2 million that will remain if you do move forward with this capital project request list that we have identified on this page. And you can take a look at the projects. And this is not new information. This was previously provided to you. And we also have included these projects as well that have been also discussed with you in previous sessions. So this is really, in my opinion, the meat of the conversation. That is somewhat of a high-level overview. The adjustments that we've made after August 5th are related to the property tax assessment revenue, the medical benefit rate decrease, the unfunded departmental budget requests that I spoke about, or our proposed reductions, and other general fund adjustments, such as the proposed additions that I was just talking about. And I will say, as we looked a little bit more in depth, there were still some questions we had about some things, whether or not they were included in the budget. And there were some things that we found that were not. There were also items that we felt were over budgeted for benefits. If someone was actually a single participant in benefits, but we had loaded family, we've done some cleanup there. So some of the adjustments that I'm talking about are budget cleanup as we've gone a little bit deeper dive into the original assumptions that we brought forward, but they're all outlined here for your review so that you can see them. So let's start with revenue increases. So the property tax assessment revenue increase that we expect to receive is approximately $530,000. We also made an adjustment for the RTD trolley reimbursement of approximately $40,000. And there was another small favorable adjustment of $453 to revenue. So our total revenue increase from the time that we had brought it forth in August is $490,453. The impact of decreasing our medical benefits to assume a 1.25 rate increase year over year is $670,522. So we were able to reduce our expenses throughout all of the departments by that amount because of that reduction. I think it's important to mention, and I mentioned this and I will mention this towards the back, as part of the negotiations, we're looking at the subsequent years, 21 and 22. And there are rate increases included in those subsequent years as well that will continue to challenge us and something that we're going to have to address as it relates to increasing medical costs in general. I had just mentioned that there were some coverage assumption details that we were able to identify, and we were able to positively impact the budget by approximately $16,130 for those adjustments. So in total, our benefits decreased from the last version by $686,000 and $686,652. The departmental budget requests that I'll be going through line by line that favorably impacted our budget totaled $893,729. So we were able to make the following favorable reductions to the proposed budget of $2,070,834. So I'm going to go into more detail. Okay. So when we came forth in May and we had the workshop, the items that you'll see over the next couple of slides were requests that the department directors made to the council. In an effort to balance the budget, the director team and individual department managers, actually I should say the department managers brought forth suggestions to the director team regarding reductions that they could make. And these are, this is the outcome. So if you recall, we talked about a bond election outreach of approximately $90,000 that was split between communications and finance. Communications is currently looking at some efficiencies within their organization and has offered approximately $25,000 in reduction. Also, in looking at a vendor change, communication was also able to lower an original request of $25,000 of technology video production to approximately $15,000, saving us $10,000. The trolley hours of operations, just based on estimated usage, that was an original request that has been reduced by $40,000. Within finance, we originally asked for a business license technician. As you recall last week when we were talking about that, that actually will be handled through internal resources that we have, so I've removed that from the finance budget. And the other, it's a small, we had thought we were going to buy capital next year, but we have the funds this year, so we are going to spend that this year. So that saved the total of those two items saved $79,000. IT had originally asked for a help desk manager. This has, Director Burkholder asked us to remove that from the budget. In Parks and Rec, the Customer Response Specialist part-time FTE request was originally for 3 part-time positions. It has been reduced to 2 part-time positions. So the savings, it was a 0.5 FTE reduction, and the savings in dollar terms was $21,977. Parks and Rec as well is looking at other efficiencies within their organization and has offered $100,000 in savings to include in this proposed budget. As well, the police vacancy savings. So in every budget, there are timing changes, and specifically in departments where you have a large number of FTEs, and there's 78 police officers, for example. If someone leaves, typically there's a typical hiring time. And police, over the past several years, we actually looked back to see what sort of savings they had as a result of timing delays of hiring new FTEs. And we're very comfortable, and they are very comfortable offering $92,000 in vacancy savings towards balancing the budget based on that fact. So they will actually reduce their budget by that amount. We also asked the department directors to look to see if there were any purchases that they were looking to make in 2020 that they could use 2019 available funds for. And within the police department, and they would have to receive those and actually receive the invoice and accrue for everything by the end of 2019. Police came forward with approximately $30 of purchases that they would be able to make at the end of 2019 instead of pushing it into 2020. What did I say? Did I? Here, let me, you know what, here. Can I please take a drink of water to get some energy that I've obviously lost tonight?
You're doing great.
There was no decimal point there. The humor helps. It does matter. You're right about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Make it 3 million.
Yeah, I was going to say, at least I didn't make it 30 million.
Right.
All right, moving forward, and again, this is just a continuation of the list that I was talking about. Public Works, the traffic pole and signage evaluation, we've removed $50,000, or Director DeAndre is recommending removing that. In the Public Works, there were 2, so this is where, I was talking about scrubbing the numbers, and when we were looking at two positions within Public Works, the salary assumptions were not gelling with the actual position. And so Director Deandra had asked us to reduce those salary assumptions by $22,000 and $24,000 each. And the fire marshal also will be able to utilize 2019 funds to purchase something that was originally in the proposed budget for 2020. So the total of the departmental reductions that I just talked about are $698,499. I got that right? There are two other favorable adjustments that I would like to talk about. So the utilities billing system maintenance cost moved to the correct fund. As you're aware, we are currently in the process of looking at our current utility billing system, and we're going through a current and future forecast to determine what our system needs are. And as we did that, we were asked, how much do we pay in maintenance fees? Through that evaluation, we discovered that the general fund has actually been paying for something it should not have been paying for. And so we have shifted those funds in the budget. So I know that brings concern, and we have to look and make sure that we do have our maintenance costs, and I believe that we do, because I had asked Kevin to look a little bit deeper once we found this, and we're feeling comfortable that this is the only adjustment that needs to be made. There are other adjustments as well to the budget for cleanup purposes, and I am hoping that I have that identified on my sheet. I don't, but it's favorable. I will get that. I did not write it down, and I'm going to look on a sheet in just a minute so I can get that for you. But the total of those two items are the $898,000 that I had mentioned. Okay. So the proposed addition. So those were the favorable items. We also have proposed additions, and I had talked briefly about the salary increases from 3 to 3.5%. We had already assumed the 3.5% for union employees. The increase of 0.5% for non-union employees impacted our proposed budget by $70,000. So we had talked about the next item for Tyler New World, the HR module maintenance of $68,000. Through our discussions, we had talked about Director Gonzalez was looking to implement a new HR system. And as part of that, the question became, would we still need to pay for the HR module within Tyler? We are still determining that, and we also, obviously we don't have a system approved yet, so we have to include this, and it was not included in the original proposed budget that we brought forth on August 5th. New additions, the community development short-term rental enforcement of $20,000. And the citywide initiatives that I was talking about total $242,989, and City Manager Lewis will be talking about those in a little bit more detail. And additional contingency. So this is for unidentified expenses, $99,624. This is actually what balances the budget, to be perfectly honest. So the contingency right now, and we'll talk about the total. It includes not only monies for unforeseen circumstances that might occur, but also if we have retirements or what have you, it would be for leave payouts, etc. So these monies are here. It's a proposal. But we're being very transparent and saying that's actually what we put forth into contingencies because it was a balance that remained in order to tie. Okay. All right, so with all of that, we had a budget gap on August 5th of approximately $1.6 million, if you'll recall that number. We had the favorable adjustments that I just referred to, our revenue increase of $490,453. I'm not going to go through the entire list, but you can see the benefit rate reduction we just spoke about, the unfunded departmental budget requests and other reductions, the other two items that I just spoke about. And if we include the initiatives and other considerations. This is how we achieved the proposed balanced budget as of this evening, September 9th. Okay. So I'm going to ask City Manager Lewis to talk about the initiatives while I look some numbers up. Are we okay with that?
Sure. Why don't we do this first? Let's, and he doesn't mind, that we actually take questions up until now, and then, is that okay? Would you prefer that he present it? Because some of those might
That's-
impact.
Either way, we can
Okay.
take questions, either way.
Would you prefer? No, I'm fine taking questions about what we've seen so far. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Super. Questions about the budget so far as presented with the changes? First of all, I'm going to say thank you for getting this back in line to zero out. I know I was on the phone when all this happened, but I thought I didn't hear anything on the other end over here. Like, that's why I had to come and show up, because I was really, I was not too excited about an unbalance there. So I really appreciate everybody going back, combing through, scraping and figuring out what we can do and what needs to be done. I hope that some of these don't mean that we're really trying to do something we can't do. I mean, if we're going to have major issues come up because we've unfunded something. So that's my only concern, but I'm really thankful.
Welcome. I think, if I may, I think that is what part of the discussion will be tonight. And as we move forward through the conversation and we talk about those items that were, that actually are now unfunded, it's a choice, right? That the council certainly has to make as we move forward and we vote on the budget in October. But certainly any advice that you might be able to provide to us would be greatly appreciated through the discussion process tonight so that we know. And if I may, I did look at, just because I left an unanswered question, I was trying to remember what that positive
right.
adjustment was. So I have a list that has a lot of check marks and lines through it as we tried to reconcile and make sure. There were some expenses that were included in 2020 that were actually going to be paid for in 2019. One in particular had to do with a surf vehicle, and that was $52,000 of that $43 million that was favorable. We also had some unfavorable adjustments that went against that related to benefits and other things too. So there were some puts and takes just trying to clean up, but that was the biggest piece of that $43,000 that was favorable that we were able to remove from the 2020 budget with assurance that it's accurate. So.
Great. Council, questions? Comments? I do have one if nobody has. I'd like to ask about Councilmember Queston. You want to go first?
I'll echo thank you, Mayor. I'll echo the mayor a little bit, and I agree. You guys were very resourceful here and got things lined up. But where we are now, we have proposed sources of $53,089,689 and proposed uses of that exact same amount. We were down to the dollar. And over $53 million, I don't think there's too many budgets that will stay right there. And it sounds like that's something that you guys expect too, that, you know, we'll probably have some unexpected things and maybe some things that we won't have to put as much expense on as we thought. But it's certainly close. It's better than the imbalance that we had a couple weeks ago. So I definitely appreciate that. One of the ones that jumped out at me, and this was a point of savings, and I'm not sure if you are the best to speak to it, but it came, and let me just get to the appropriate slide here. It was on the police vacancy savings, and it's $92,000. Can you expand on that a little bit? And if there's another person to speak to that, certainly hear from them as well.
I will do my best. I don't think, oh, you are here, John. Would you like to answer that question, John?
Thank you, Chief Collins.
Oh, sure. Well,
Do you want to pull it close to you? It loves to hear your
got
voice
it.
close.
Well, following discussion from a couple weeks ago, my staff got together and, you know, we've been looking at our budget historically. And, you know, going back to 2011, every year we've come in under budget primarily because of salary savings. And due to the fact that we have the largest budget, we felt we had some bigger skin in the game, so to speak. And so we felt that If we reduced our budget by 1%, we could pull that off, and not with sleepless nights. I'm almost certain we can do that. And I take away that almost, I'm certain I can do that. So, I mean, every year we come in several $100,000 under, and we've prepaid some 2020 bills this year, and we know how to strategize hiring and, and the timing of such. So I feel pretty comfortable with that.
Thank you, Chief. And I guess as a follow-up, it's termed as vacancy savings, which tells me this is in between staff members, I would think, members of your staff. And so you don't think that will impact coverage in any negative way, though?
No. There's always vacancies. We hear rumor about 2 more coming up in the latter part of this year. And historically, we've been trying to hire, no less than probably 2 police officers a year. And now next year, with the possibility of hiring, let's say, a records clerk, if that stays on the table. I won't begin that search until the 1st of January. And so, you're buying yourself some time, incrementally, if you will, over the months to start chipping away at those savings. And that's part of our strategy as well. And so,
If I may,
Go ahead.
as I had mentioned, maybe vacancy savings isn't the greatest term. I've used that before in budgeting. It's more of a hiring timing savings, and I think that's as Chief Collins described it.
yeah.
I call it salary breakage in my world, and it's the timing of, like, I have a couple positions that are empty. We're going to come way under budget because of it. And if you can look back historically and see that that's pretty common, and you're still able to do your service,
Yes.
it makes sense that we'd count it in the budget and just say, hey, let's count this on it.
You bet. And that helps. I appreciate the background. I certainly consider the work you do absolutely critical to public safety, and that's number one. So I appreciate the background on that. Thank you.
Thanks for the hard work you do in that, too. I know you always keep track of it. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. And this is a question, and I could be totally wrong, and I just, would like understanding and clarification. In looking through this, if I remember correctly, the fire marshal's office was moved out from under the police department, which that budget was $600,000. But when I looked at the numbers for 2019 and 2020, I believe, it looks like you haven't cut the spending by that $600,000. You are still, and I could be wrong about this, it is still pretty close, which, if I'm reading those figures correctly, it would appear as though you're spending $600,000 more than you did last year.
If I could address that question. So he has, the police department has the biggest salary and wages budget, and with the 3.5% increase, that's a significant part of the increase.
Okay, so,
frankly.
all right. That's where it probably is?
The majority.
Okay, thank you.
It's a lot, isn't it?
It is.
Councilmember Sierra was next.
Mine is more of a comment. I do want to thank staff and all the department heads on all the work they did to balance the budget. I'm looking through all the reductions within the departments themselves, and I don't see anything in there that I felt was a must-have. So I do appreciate all the work, and obviously just the savings on the medical costs. I know that you were looking to lower the number that came forth earlier in August, but that's just an impressive amount, so I thank everyone for that.
Councilmember Barentine.
I really didn't have anything before, but a couple of issues have come up that just kind of aren't making sense now, and there are 2 questions. One that Councilmember Questa brought up, and you said that the vacancy savings was basically based off of 1 employee, like the records clerk won't be hired until January, and you're saving some money.
Oh, no. I'm sorry if I miscommunicated that. So,
I think that's what the chief said, so maybe I don't know if you could clarify.
he used that as one example
okay.
of a possible savings if it's in the budget starting in January, but he's not able to hire someone until February. That 1 month of salary would be saved. But there's also, just historically, based on people leaving the department and coming into the department, the timing of actually hiring them, historically, there have been salary savings. So he is willing to challenge that amount. And it was actually higher than we think the $92,000 is actually conservative as far as those savings to what's currently in the budget, quite frankly. So it's multiple positions that there would be timing of hiring that would
Yeah, because I wouldn't
offer
think
some
that a
favorable.
records clerk would be making $92,000 or that just a couple of months would go ahead and do that. But then I would go back to Councilmember Quest's concern that we do and have put those positions in because in the past there were concerns about coverage. So I would like to see a little bit more information on how we're doing that. If we're already anticipating that and that's a normal process and it's really in there, then it really should become a normal piece of the budget, and it really isn't then savings. So we need to kind of come to some kind of a little bit better handle on that. The breakage for the examples that we have, $92,000 is quite a bit. The question that Councilmember Russell brought up is that on page 17 here of this, is that you say that the proposed salary increase is only going to total $70,000. What she was asking about was $600,000. Councilmember Russell, how much was the money you were talking about? It's $600,000, and that gets explained that that's the increase because that's true, they are the largest employer body department, but you say on page 17 that the total salary increase from the 3.0 to 3.5 non-union and union, or just non-union employees, or
Yeah,
union and non-union is 70,000.
Okay, can I take each?
Go ahead,
Okay,
please.
I'll answer both of those separately. I'm trying to think. So let me talk about the salary increases first. So in the original budget that we prepared for you, there was a 3% increase included. In this budget.
For non-union.
For non-union, thank you. 3.5 for union. In this budget that we're presenting today, the difference is the 0.5% for non-union employees. Impact is $70,000. So this isn't the full amount of the 3.5% increase to the entire police department budget. This is only the portion that increased from the August version to today. Does that help?
Okay, but then it would help then to make sure, since you put those additions in here, to go ahead and put the total amount of the additions for the raises altogether. Then I'm curious why is that piece in here?
So it was, we did talk about it as part of a previous discussion that we had. What this presentation is doing, and you mentioned the word savings as well, so I want to be clear. We had a $1.6 million gap, so everything that I've talked about is related year-over-year savings per se,
Right.
if that helps a little bit. So we had talked about the increase, and I don't know, Jenny, if you could look at a previous deck related to the wages and salaries increases of the 3% that it originally added. That was information that was previously shared with council. This is the increase on top of what was previously shared.
So the police department got a similar increase.
Yes, so 3.5% for union and non-union now.
Okay, and how many employees are we counting for the non-union employees that make up the $70,000 increase from
Do we have that number?
3 to 3.5% because they
Okay.
got a similar raise?
While Jenny's looking that up, can I ask you to repeat the previous question regarding coverage? I should have written it down. There's a question before we got
I
started.
think she was asking about whether we had the correct police coverage given this breakage kind of thing going on. What
Well,
was the coverage?
Well, if you have in here you have additions, and you have the salary increases, and you've listed the non-union employees as an increase of $70,000. I would imagine we probably have more non-union employees than we do union employees, or at least similar.
Oh.
But I would imagine that we'd have to have a lot of police officers to make up $600,000. So that was given as a reason for where that $600,000 went, spending more money because they gave this raise. Then I see the non-union employees $70,000 increase to raise them 3 to 3.5%. So I can't imagine that we have enough to really take up that entire $600,000 just on raises alone. I think we have about 110. Say we have 120 employees. I mean, imagine that that would not.
So again, this is a reconciliation from our previous shortfall of 1.6 million and puts and takes or changes to the budget. The $70,000 is representative of only 0.5% of the increase to non-union employees. 3.5% for union employees was included in the previous budget presentation. And it is included in our overall $53 million of our expenditures.
City Manager, I think, might have he wants to say something.
I do. I think the disconnect, because your question sounds correct, but what isn't noted, or maybe what hasn't been noted verbally, is that the 3.5% in police, that equals, somewhere not quite to 600,000, but that's a big amount. What you're looking at is only a 0.5 increase for a limited number of employees that are non-union.
Right, and that's why I want to see that, since that was the answer to her.
Could you
Right.
talk into your microphone?
We
Thank
can
you.
get that for you.
Because she asked a very specific question of where the 600,000 went, and since we don't have that information, so if this 70,000 is only doing the 0.5% increase on there, then we have to have an apples to apples comparison, because what we don't have documented here is where the 600,000 went. It's just being anecdotally stated, and that's all I'm trying to do is get the information.
Right, and that has been, as Maria mentioned, has been in a previous presentation, but we'll get that number for
Yeah.
you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Can I just mention one thing? I was looking for this next slide. So in the slide deck that was provided to you, on slide 58, the Police Department operational requests, the 2019 budget was 14.6 million. The proposed 2020 budget is 14.6 million, a difference of, this really is $3,000. And the reason that it's $3,000 is because the increases that they have in salaries, the 3.5%, is offset by a reduction of the movement from the fire marshal to CMO.
Okay.
The police budget is flat year over year, except for $3,000. And I hope that helps.
Great, thank you.
Page 58, and it also includes, yes, so you can see their budget is 14.6 million in 2019. Their proposed budget in 2020 is 14.6 million. The new budget in 2020 includes an increase of 3.5% to personnel. You can see that personnel is actually going down, even though we're increasing salaries and we're proposing a record specialist position be added to that line item as well. So you are seeing the savings, or we are experiencing the savings of that shift.
Great,
So-
thank you.
Does that
So
help?
let me just clarify then, so this is budget, this proposed budget then moves the fire marshal's department out of here, and this is reflected in there, but we don't have the actual increase for that, and I would like to see that piece, because again, page 58 actually doesn't really give that information.
Right.
Nor does it actually state that the fire marshal is being moved, or how much that is being moved, which is going to affect the city manager's budget, which is also a concern, because then his budget becomes there's a revenue piece that it goes into your budget that's never been there before. So if we could have those reflected so that we're like documenting what we're actually doing, that would be helpful. Thanks.
I think we have a misunderstanding of what this deck is versus the last one, and the question she's asking is about the trading between, so we can just give that again, right? I'm not sure who was next. Councilmember Wink?
It was me, thank you, Mayor.
Okay.
I realize we aren't making any decisions and changing or
Well, we can propose
building
things tonight.
policy here tonight, but I just want to say, maybe it's a reiteration, well, it's definitely a reiteration of what Director Sobota said many, many times. I absolutely am not in favor of making any reduction to the police budget just because they're as are many other departments, to close the gap, making modifications. That's nothing we should automate or bring forward as was suggested earlier, in future budgets. I mean, it was stated, and I want to state that I do not support considering making that a flat, continuing practice.
So you're not in favor of
Member
them-
Barentine suggested because the police have a surplus and they're able to make some, modifications. Oh, we should just weave it into, and reduce. No, we don't do that.
Okay. All right, Mayor Pro Tem?
I would just like to make a point that I don't believe Councilmember Barentine was suggesting that at all. I think it had to do with the question that I asked. The question that I have too, and the fact that we've been able to negotiate a lower rate for the benefits for employees, have we cut their benefits? Are they losing benefits because of what we have negotiated?
So I am not the Director of Human Resources, and Director Gonzalez is not here this evening. I did sit in the presentations for for the vendors, and I can honestly say I don't believe so. If anything, I've heard of some additional benefits, quite frankly, some positives. And I think if that is a question that we have, we can move forward with that conversation with Director Gonzalez, and we are planning on bringing forth that information to council as it relates to the contract as
Manager Lewis wants to weigh in on this.
I would also mention that this is still an increase in costs, even though it is a new contract that we're negotiating. We're actually still spending more, and I just want to make sure that we understand we've reduced that from what we thought it was going to be, but it's actually still quite a bit more. I will also mention that in talking to the city managers in the area, we are getting a better rate than what they're getting in terms of their next year's increases, which are more than our 1.6% that we're proposing.
1.25.
1.25.
Right, and I appreciate that. Here's part of the reason that I'm asking this question is because last year after the budget came out, there were some suggestions that we combine funds, and I guarantee you that the Non-Emergency Employees Retirement Board is very concerned that their benefits would be cut, because there were some suggestions a year ago that the city was no longer going to use that. And so we want to make sure that the benefits of the employees and the retirees are taken care of. So that's the reason I asked that question. Thank you.
Great. I have a couple of questions. I want to go back to the capital projects funds, the CPF recommended projects, and which is on the hard copy 12. I'm not sure. Is that what it is on this too? I wanted to ask about, first of all, the fiber network. Is this an upgrade? Can you remind me, is this an upgrade? It's what's going on with our city connections, right?
That is a question
is
that
it
we would ask Director Brocklander.
I'm going to take a stab at this and look to Sam for some yeses or nos if he knows. I believe this is a fiber
You
network.
never get called on for anything but to help us when we can't get online.
That fiber network, Sam, is to connect the city facilities in this vicinity via a fiber connection. Is that correct? And I'll repeat what he says after he... Right, so when
So
you
is it
look
the
at all
last
of the
mile
different
sort of thing?
facilities, right, that we have in this general area, this is the ability to connect those via fiber, which makes them much more resilient
Okay.
in terms of disaster. It also makes us obviously have better speeds between those facilities.
So it promotes security and communication.
It would be a more secure connection,
Okay.
right?
And then the next one, the audiovisual for the council chambers. Excuse me. So I know that we were really pushing hard to do that because things didn't seem to be working, and we thought it was the microphones in there and all kinds of things, and yet now it's working. So I'm wondering if this is a needed expense this year, and if we think we're going to save by doing it now, and then I'd be more in favor of it. But if not, could we divert it somewhere else?
Mayor, members of council, this was one that came up. I think Councilmember Martinez brought this up during our first discussion. And this is definitely one that our IT director says we can put off. Certainly because of the good work of Sam and others, the council chamber setup has improved, I think, significantly. And so the question is, we know it's going to fail at some point, but as Director Brocklander mentioned in her response to Councilmember Martinez's question, we think we could turn that around. We might have as much as a month delay if it completely fails before we could get a new system in. So that's really the biggest risk that we take in that one. But I'm sure accommodations could be made to have meetings, for instance, in this room temporarily as we worked on that. So it's not something that would be unovercomable if you wanted to push that one.
I don't want to kick a maintenance or a purchase down the road that really we need to do. So if we think, gosh, it's going to fail in the next couple months, let's go ahead and do it. But if it's just sort of like, we know it's old and let's do it now, but could be another 3 to 4 years on it, even get 1 more year out of it and then do it, because that's a lot of money. And our alleys had, I mean, with the other alley piece, we're doing about a quarter of the alleys with the special treatment, is that right?
I think it's
And
about
this-
20% with what we've put in the budget now.
How much would this possibly do if we added to it?
And that is via contract, which we have a contractor that does that work who I think could take on additional capacity. I think we'd be getting, we wouldn't get quite to half of the city, but we could get a lot further towards, more of our alleys being maintained. And what that would include, if we haven't discussed that already, is a new surface coat of recycled asphalt with a chemical coating that actually makes kind of a hard crust on top of that. So it's a good drivable surface that holds up much better than what many alleys have today.
Wow, I'm really a tech person, but I drove through alleys the other night when it rained again, and I just think we have so many alleys that need something more safer. So I would be interested in exploring that. Then the other question was, the IT infrastructure. I think I know what that is, and it's probably really needed. The other would be and I know this was brought up before, the HR payroll system. I'm just wondering, does that really? Are we ready for it? Is the funding now the best timing? Is there another time? Or what kind of position are we in to do this and do it well? It's really not fair. She's not even here again, but I'm asking for.
Mayor, Council, the HR system is a very expensive item in your budget this year. And it not only shows up here, but also in the capital. Well, this is capital, but it also shows up as some operational costs as well. As I think when Director Gonzalez was here before mentioned, and she has not had a chance to present to council, but there are a number of significant kind of issues. Some of those issues have actually come to light as we've gotten Cora requests for how many people have turned over in the last year. It is extremely hard with the current, essentially paper system that we're on to kind of determine that. We don't have good communication electronically between kind of our financial systems and our HR systems, which obviously for payroll and other things are pretty important. That said, we are getting by. I think long term, this purchase will allow us to have an FTE reduction of 1 based on our preliminary analysis. So ongoing, there would be a cost savings, but obviously in this the proposed fiscal year, it would be a significant investment. So we're certainly open to council's direction on that. We absolutely could prolong that 1 year. We would want to budget a few dollars, if you did push that off, budget a few dollars to prepare for something in 2021.
So maybe over 3 years, we'd make it all back, is what you're saying, perhaps with a savings and an FTE or
I'd like to
something close to that, maybe?
So I have done an analysis. I think it is close to break even. It's not exactly break even. But what it provides to us is better information, accuracy on tax tables, less errors, things like that.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Sure. So we did an analysis where we looked at the ongoing costs of having a hosted HR system where we pay a subscription fee. And we also looked at the costs that we are currently paying for the disparate systems that currently make up our HR system. So within the first couple of years, depending upon when the maintenance on those particular contracts that we currently have expire, there's a cost. There's a cost. There isn't a benefit. Going forward into future years, when those other maintenance costs go away, you get closer to the point where the costs are about equivalent. So it's break even if you stay with the current systems or move forward with the new system. So really when we're looking at the system, what we really need to look at is the benefit that we achieve with better information, the promptness of getting information, the reassurance that the information we're getting is accurate, and less manual time. And what wasn't included in the analysis is the personnel within HR, their time that it takes currently, that they could be doing other more beneficial things for the city.
Makes sense. Our records are held, I'm sure, in paper in some cases too, and that's probably not the best way to either keep track of some things. But all right, that's enough for me. Councilmember Wink.
Thank you, Mayor. I do believe we need to move forward in terms of how we're managing our human resource documentation and processes. What I'm curious about is, and certainly manual processes should be done away with if at all possible. However, what I'm curious about is whether or not there could be a phased approach to working away from the myriad systems we currently use and all of the manual labor, and toward what will cost $200,000 here and X amount on other operational slides, etc. The total cost of this new proposed system. Are there alternatives to sort of inch our way toward it so that it's not such a lump sum burden on the budget?
So I am not in a position to be able to answer that
Sure.
question, but I certainly will speak with Director Gonzalez, and we'll make sure we provide that answer.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Manager Lewis, take us on the next section. Or would you, you know what, I gotta tell you, the difference between that and those two is just like, you can't see them at all. Like, yeah, please go ahead.
So I'll just add to the request. I think one of the concerns I had as well was just a quick timeline. I believe they were going to go live with the new HR system in January. So just understanding that timeline, I think, is something that I would want as part of the request. And then secondly, since we brought up the fiber network, I believe this is just the first year, but there was going to be several years of this as well. So I can't remember what facility it was for this year, but there's going to be additional facilities for the next 3 or 4 years. So Director Brocklander can explain that timeline, just so people are aware that we're going to see this in next year's budget and the year after that. So
it's an expensive project phased over time, I
Right.
think, on that one, isn't it? Yeah.
May I think, yeah, she had reviewed that, but you'd like that detail actually provided?
Yeah, if she knows how
Because
many
she
more
spoke to
segments.
it.
well, we spoke to it, and I just don't. This is going to come up in the budget again next year. So if the public sees we're spending $250,000 this year, we're going to spend another $250 next year. It's because there is a project timeline for this.
Okay, thank you.
Would you like a break? Mr. Lewis has said he's never seen a council go this long without taking breaks, so let's take one. 5-minute break, be back here at 5 too, so bio break and. Me too.
Just an FYI, the videos that come
Oh, is it?
flippy,
Oh, is it?
like it's flickering. The audio's stable,
Do
but
we
the
need to,
video's like
should I
flickering. So
say something like that?
I'm
or-
gonna reboot some stuff right now. During a break. That's what I was waiting on, a break. So, yeah, it should be up by that.
Okay, by the time you get back. That's because of this, it's not working, yeah. That's totally different than this. This has nothing to do with it. So I asked, I called last night, I said, what is this? It's just replacing all the microphones and the whole, that's not been our problem. It's the server, it's the program that we have. A lot of cities use it, but I don't know why ours, it has nothing to do with. So, I mean. They back ordered some kind, what was it called? Sam can explain it, and I think they got it, but they thought it was, what is it called? Yeah. It's the technology of the YouTube thing is what it is, and the way it has nothing to do, these are headphones.
Testing, testing.
Testing. Do you need us to talk?
What?
Oh, it's working, okay. Great. Sorry for those of you listening at home. We have had some technical difficulties, and hopefully the system is back up running. Thank you for being patient. We didn't do anything while we were down, so we've just re-begun the study session, and Manager Lewis is going to take us through his next section.
Very good. Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, Council, if it's okay with you, this list is ordered with what I consider the more kind of challenging conversations at first. I hope that the bottom two are areas that you recognize as direct results of your requests, as well as citizen engagement that we've had just in the brief time that I've been here. It's almost not fair to say these are city manager initiatives. I've certainly asked for them, but they are a direct result from the things that you've been asking for. First of all, with the homeless camp abatement, as you know, that was an expensive process last year, and we think that if by resourcing this better, we can stay on top of that. As we've talked about during the interview process for the city manager position, it's something that, you know, with resources, just small amounts of resources on an ongoing basis, you can prevent the need for those kind of large-scale cleanups. So if you have any questions about that, I'm glad to answer that. Dorothy Hargrove, Interim Deputy City Manager Dorothy Hargrove, has come to this dollar amount with the work that she's done on this over the last year. And so she can help answer those questions too. The second one is the seasonal code officer. This is not a full-time position. This would be a part-time position. It's something that I have found in other communities that has worked very well to supplement the kind of the seasonal nature of the highest period of code complaints and code enforcement activities, which is in that growing season. Because of those overgrowth restrictions that we have and the complaints that we've received, particularly in the alleys of our community, but really community-wide, we think that this is a great way to start chipping away at that, providing code officers with another resource on the street that's documenting, posting, and then the code officers who are trained and certified can actually work through the legal process, but do that much quicker if they're not having to both do the out in the field work plus the kind of the behind the scenes legal actions. So that totals about $30,000. And again, that's for, I believe, a 6-month period, comparable to what we have now. That would not be a benefited position. So moving on to the more maybe harder to explain items, starting with the top one, placemaking and wayfinding. So really the problem statement that as I've talked to people both in the community, neighborhoods, particularly commercial areas in some of my meetings, some of which have been people that you all have suggested that I meet with, that have been very enlightening. Certainly, staff has some of these same perceptions, but really the problem statement is that residents and visitors to the community really don't necessarily know when they're leaving or entering Englewood. We have some kind of more CDOT type signage that are on a number of our entrances. Why is that important? First of all, when you think about instilling community pride into people, a lot of times pride is just knowing that you're in a place. There is a place you've entered. You are here. And that sense of community pride that, okay, now we're in Englewood and this is a place that I'm proud to be. And that signage, that placemaking, things like the grass that are in the median as you come into the downtown area on Broadway are a great example, an excellent example of placemaking. And wayfinding is kind of the same thing, but it's actually words, it's signage, it would say entering Englewood. Those types of things, again, create that sense of place, that sense of identity. And the reason that is important is because when you have lower pride in the community, you tend to have more criminal activity, you have less property maintenance, you have lower property values. It's kind of a cascading effect when community pride goes down. So what we're really looking at is how can we increase community pride, and placemaking can be a big part of that, as can wayfinding. Another example is commercial districts, which I've consistently heard from folks at the chamber, from folks in the ACE committee, that we don't have defined commercial districts. So how can we use signage and placemaking to help create that? One of the suggestions that was thrown out was some sort of lighting system above Broadway. That's placemaking. That's not just a decoration. It's a way to identify you are here and you have entered into somewhere special that we think is of high importance. And we can do that with a number of ways, street banners and things that are less expensive maybe than that, but that could help really our commercial districts create that sense of place. So another thing that we have a lack of is the ability to really know where our community amenities are. Pirates Cove is something that a lot of people from all over the region come to. Do we have good signage that really kind of leads them? It's called breadcrumbs is the technical, or I don't know if it's a technical term, but what sign makers use to say to get people to where you want them to go is using this kind of breadcrumb approach where you're putting signs along your right-of-way that get people to where they want to go. It's also an advertisement, and so and you're connoting messages about your community with colors and fonts and imagery that can really help build your brand and reinforce the brand, which again goes back to that kind of community pride. So again, it's really just a missed opportunity. Not having those things really very strongly here is just a missed opportunity for really building that brand and that sense of identity. Any questions about those? And then I'll get into the neighborhood
Councilmember
items.
Martinez.
Thank you. I am all for that, and we've talked about it quite a bit over the last couple of years. I know Cultural Arts Commission has spent a good amount of time talking about it. With the $50,000, do you think that would get us part of the way there? Maybe just like the first year it would be, $50,000, and then continue to build on that? Because obviously $50,000 wouldn't probably do everything we would dream of, right?
Right, thank you for that question, and I'm not addressing a big important part is what is the money for? First of all, I should tell you that we do have about $150,000 in a capital budget that has not been spent from a couple of years ago, where there was kind of an idea that we should do this, but it was never kind of implemented. We have done spent some money out of that original, I think 250,000 for signage at some of the city facilities, but there is about $150,000 left. So we have some money to implement. What we don't have is a design manual that we come in and we say, this is where the signs need to go, this is what they look like, here is the community engagement process where we are pulling communities together, the community together, and neighborhoods together, and commercial districts together, to really say, okay, what do you think the identity is of this area, and how can we turn that into placemaking or signage that really represents what what you think about the community. The hardest is the gateways into the community, because you really have to engage the entire community in, what do you think we are as a community? Do you want a classy looking sign? Do you want a fun looking sign? There are all sorts of ways that you can go with that. So that's a very difficult process, and the 50,000 would get us a great plan that had, significant community engagement, that would really help us answer that question.
Awesome, thank you.
Councilmember Berentine.
When we talked about this before, basically what it was about downtown, about we had, I think, some realtors that were going to give us some money, pay for one sign, and then maybe bring that along Broadway. And the businesses didn't want it. They didn't want any more junk on the sidewalk. They didn't want any more stuff blocking their signs or taking up their ability to do a patio or the flow for it. I mean, part of what I think like Englewood Grand wanted was just the Hollywood lights across the street, like what they do down in Lodo. However, I'm getting a little bit different idea from what you're saying, and that's more like what Greenwood Village does at the beginning of theirs. I was talking to somebody on Clarkson, and Greenwood Village, they've got that little entrance piece to it. It looks like a residential area, it looks like a community, and they just thought, well, if we can't slow people down on Clarkson, maybe we can at least make it look like they're coming into a community. And I would like to see what you're talking about. If there's going to be differences where we're talking about the industrial area or commercial area, retail area or neighborhoods, similar to what Arapahoe Acres does, where you've got some identity in that particular neighborhood, and each of the neighborhoods already have names. I mean, we already have some identity going on, so it sounds like you're wanting to go ahead and make sure to include that community in, or that area in, to see what their ideas would be for that kind of what placemaking and wayfinding would be. Like doing Pirates Cove sign on Bellevue somewhere to say Englewood, this way or whatever, similar to that. But that's way different than what we talked about for wayfinding before. I mean, because we didn't want to get trapped into the Littleton, where they've got a historic wayfinding sign, they got a Hollywood wayfinding sign, they've spent $1.6 million on wayfinding signs, and everybody in this very concentrated area, and they just go, it was a waste of money, and that's just dumb. You have competing signs and the School for the Blind down the street, where they're like, why would we have done this? So we originally, I thought it was going to be similar to that. So if it's going to be different, I would be much more supportive of the way that you're bringing this up to go forward. And I know you don't have all of the ideas set out yet, but I at least am very supportive of the foundation that you've kind of set out about this, so thank you.
Councilmember, I don't know if it was Wink or Cuesta, to be honest.
Thank you, Cuesta. Thanks, Mayor. I wholeheartedly support everything you've introduced here this evening. Manager Lewis. I love the idea of the breadcrumbs in terms of leading visitors and residents, any human body in our community, to the special areas. There's Pirates Cove, there's the Gothic Theater, there might be a certain church, there might be, there are lots of hidden gems. Some are obvious, but there are hidden gems here. And so I think it is important to incorporate some sort of signage to not just celebrate the unique nature of Englewood, of little small town Englewood, right next to Denver, but Englewood that has grown and evolved into where we are today. I also love the idea of, and before I say that, I see that your next bullet point is talking about neighborhood identification, so I won't go into that and tell you what I think about that. But I do also love the idea of placemaking represented through, for example, those lights highlighting a downtown district. I've been to a couple of sessions in the 2 CML conferences I've attended that highlighted the development practices, best practice in developing downtowns. I've read some books on the topic, you know, The Great Good Place by Ray Oldenburg. They're just wonderful thoughts and history and insights into how you really develop a thriving downtown. And I do think that that is one key area. I've seen it in many, many cities across the United States. It's not just Larimer Square, and it is a beautiful way based on what's happening in our little 3400 block, for example. So I think these examples, wayfinding, placemaking, they're progressive, they're current, they're for now, they're for the upcoming future, and so thank you for presenting that, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say next.
Councilmember Cuesta.
For the homeless abatement, $30,000 directed to that, and I got the impression then that is specifically geared towards the Platte River.
I'm going to ask Interim Deputy City
Sure.
Manager Dorothy Hargrove to come up and address that.
Thank you for asking. No, that is for continual abatement of smaller camps that could be on the Platte River, or they could be in a hidden pocket at Bellevue Park, which we've seen recently. So any place that people are setting up a camping situation that's inappropriate, we'd ask for professional services to come help clean them up to ensure health and safety and prompt response.
Thank you. So citywide enforcement is what that's
Absolutely.
dedicated to. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Sierra.
I guess I'll ask about the seasonal code officer. Have we identified how we're going to use that additional officer, if approved?
So upon being hired, so we post a position, hire the position in, and then they would be specifically, my vision for it would be that they would be specifically targeting overgrowth violations. So that's grass, weeds, maybe it's, trees, voluntary trees that come up and that sort of thing in the alleys. In talking to Code Manager Lewis, he, sees the value in, looking into something like this. He initially had some concerns, well, they're not certified, but he's now, thinking through the fact that they can do a lot of the in-field work and documentation and posting violations that again frees up officers to do kind of their normal duties in the new 4 districts that are being created. Does that answer your question?
It does answer the question. Thank you.
Councilmember Barentine.
I do have a question about doing a seasonal code officer on the heels of just hiring another officer, and that we haven't really truly vetted how best we're doing moving those 4 districts. So we had huge concerns about the way that code enforcement is going. We hire another officer, and we haven't even, they've barely got their uniform on, and to go ahead and talk about this at this point without truly having some kind of evaluative process of how we're using this and putting this together, I think might be a little premature.
Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you. Since we're on the seasonal code enforcement officer, I guess we're kind of skipping around a little bit, but I'm in favor of it. I think it makes a lot of sense to do a part-time. And when we know that is our growing season, that we have a lot of issues with that, I think a seasonal part-time position makes a whole lot of sense. And especially because I think it's a good way to alleviate the concerns of us saying all the time, we're not proactive enough, we're only reactive. I think this is a good solution for that particular need that we see a lot of in the summertime. And I think it's a really smart way to go about that. So I'm supportive.
Councilmember Wade.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm also fully supportive of the seasonal code officer. We heard last meeting from Code Enforcement Supervisor Lewis, who made very clear the imbalance between the human resources on that, in that division, and the number of calls, the volume of work. And so, yes, adding another human being was more than overdue and will support them being more proactive and moving forward. And I think it only supports the argument for an unbenefited part-time individual in for these grass and weed seasons, just to manage that percentage of the workload, so that these full-time, perhaps more technically trained individuals to tend to everything that, well, yeah, the rest. I think it's necessary, it's been warranted, it's been explained, it's been supported in all of the numbers and documentation explanation we've had, most recently last week.
Mayor Pro Tem Russell?
Thank you. I do kind of have a logistical question, because the new code enforcement officer that we just brought on, it took 2 or 3 months to train him before he could ever go out. So what is the turnaround time? We hire part-time seasonal employees. They still are going to have to be trained, and it's going to take staff time to train them. And so is the payback worth it? And I do happen to agree with Councilmember Barentine that we don't have a baseline established yet, because we're just changing over right now. Thank you.
Would you like to answer any of them?
Sure, Mayor and council members, thank you for those comments. And those are great comments. I mean, the fact that, you know, we are just now going to having a newly trained and ready to go out into the field code officer start. We will have about 3 months, obviously, for them to kind of get in a pattern of their new district. What I saw when I came into the community is, number one, so much consternation, and I think we can all agree, within the community about code enforcement. And I'll tell you, that's not normal. Most cities do not have a lot of drama or concern around code enforcement. I've never been in a city that did. And the second thing that I notice is that because we have the very unique situation of having code officers also be animal control officers, that in my opinion, and while the numbers don't hold it out, because we have more code cases than we do animal control cases, the animal control cases are far more complex in most cases than the code cases. Obviously, there are exceptions to that. But I would argue, and Mr. Lewis, Code Manager Lewis, doesn't agree with me exactly, that we really only have 2 code officers and we have 2 animal control officers. His numbers are a little bit different. But as I look at it, and knowing what I know about how code works and how animal control works, that combined system really limits severely what we in most communities call code enforcement, because they're having to do those other functions. Does it make sense to have them combined? Absolutely. I mean, it's actually pretty efficient. I think more cities should look at it. But we shouldn't say we have 4 code officers. We simply don't. You know, we have what he would say, I think it's 2.5 code officers, and then the rest in animal control. So, yeah, so to me, we are a city of a certain age and of a certain development pattern that we no longer can afford to only have even 2.5 code officers. When a community is aging like we are, and it's just a cycle of how all cities go, you have to increase code enforcement, or you're going to start seeing your property values decline. You're going to see more properties falling into disrepair, which again creates that vicious cycle, downward spiral. And so to me, I think it's critical to increase the manpower of that function, even though we already have increased by 1, because we were, in my opinion, already too low.
Councilmember, Wink. No, oh, you're done? Okay. No, it's fine. I actually would love to, I think it might be good to pilot it this year and see what happens. And we have a baseline from last year. We know what the complaints are. I mean, that's what I'd like to see happen. And after the end, but I would like to have us have an assessed beginning point and end point and see what happens with it. It is definitely problematic. Alleys, I think, contribute to it too, in the way we have not maintained alleys the way that they maybe had been before, and the 2 exacerbate each other. And And I think there was some point when the city used to trim trees in the alleys and do things, and some may perhaps it wasn't communicated properly, so people were expecting people to be taking care of some things that weren't taken care of, and a lot of educational things that are not the same as they used to be. So I think it might help us, even if it's for one season, to get ahead of it all. So I'm fine with it.
Do you
Want to
wrap
go
up?
on to the other?
I'm sorry that I'm going long. I know these are more complex issues. So the last one, the next two, the second and third bullet on the slide refer to some neighborhood services that I think that could really benefit us. So again, starting with the problem statements of what are we trying to solve and resolve, there is this sense that Englewood, even though we are an urban community, we are a first-ring suburb, that we are losing that sense of kind of small town feel. And I'm not talking about small town level of services or small town quality of life. I'm talking about neighbors knowing neighbors. How are we interacting, and how are we really encouraging neighborhoods to be connected? How are we encouraging the public to get involved with their local government and civic organizations, beyond that? And so I would also say that neighborhood identity, I appreciate Councilmember Barrentine's comment that, we do have names. I talk to many residents who don't have a name for their neighborhood. I have one of the more defined, I think, neighborhood, and we have signage and things like that, and there's kind of a group, an email list and that sort of thing. That does not exist citywide, and I think that actually creates a more disconnected, a less cohesive community. And that, again, translates into a community that is not engaged in the public policy making process. It's not engaged with helping neighbors. I have been talking to a resident who often comes to council about the need for kind of a volunteer system where, when you have an elderly neighbor who can't, take care of their sidewalks, in many cases, in fact, right across the street from me, there's a woman who their neighbors are helping take care of that spot. But I think that that's a result of our neighborhood being really cohesive. And so I think that when we look at some of the issues that we have with crime, that we have with code enforcement, those could be resolved in part. It's not a panacea by any means, but it's a way for for neighbors to help neighbors that are elderly, that are disabled, that are in need, that we can kind of pitch in. But until we have that people knowing one another in a more cohesive kind of neighborhood feel, I think that we continue to miss opportunities to do that. We also, again, and research shows that actually when people are more connected to their neighborhood, they also have more pride in their community overall. So again, it goes back to that pride, and how do we as a community, as a city, have a role in helping people connect? One of the emails that I got from a resident today, which I very much appreciated, was talking about, maybe with budget constraints, this isn't the best use of resources. Certainly we have to take a look at that. But what I would argue is that other cities are far ahead of Englewood in terms of having neighborhood resources where there's at least one person on staff that's really helping empower neighborhoods to, number one, get to know each other. Maybe that's in the form of additional, national night out groups, but events throughout the year where they can kind of get together. There was a recent post on social media, why don't we have parades? A lot of times parades start as a neighborhood kind of idea, and events in the community start as a neighborhood idea, and they kind of grow. And so again, I think if we want to encourage that sense of neighborliness, that sense of, the community having more of a cohesive feel, I think we have to put some resources, or should put some resources towards this. And so the proposed resource that we're talking about is one staff member. So you see the resource coordinator that I mentioned there. That's a fully benefited position. And again, this could also be a term. I like the idea of the pilot project for the seasonal code officer. This also could be a term employee. I would say we would at least need a 2-year kind of term. In my last city, we actually did the same thing with an additional community resource specialist and made it a term position, so that's something we could do here. The additional dollars, the $50,000, would be, number one, in order to even just identify the neighborhoods and get a sense of who the neighborhoods are, we will be using some of the work Historic Preservation Commission is doing to use subdivision names names as potentials, potential way to kind of create a neighborhood identity. Schools, parks are another source. But just getting that information and interviewing residents about where do you think you live and where do you want to live in terms of a neighborhood identity, we really need probably some assistance, staffing assistance, just in the first year to actually do that, because it's a lot of boots on the ground, it's a lot of collecting emails from different people, contact information and that sort of thing. And that would also pay for some training and things like that, certainly. I do want to point out that in terms of resources, this would be close to revenue neutral because what was mentioned in the presentation that Director Sobota mentioned was that we are finishing up some reorganization in one of the departments that was started a few years back, and we have identified a position that we think could transfer into this. They will be given the opportunity to apply for this position, but as some of the cost savings that we expect to receive in 2020, we think we could actually, bring on a new person and be, more or less revenue neutral. So I do want to point out that. The outreach would be surveys, events, door-to-door, school outreach, outreach at the schools, because, people with kids a lot of times have a strong connection to a neighborhood because of the school, the neighborhood school, but others don't. So how can we kind of beef that up? In the first year, it would be developing a plan for how we're going to, research best practices, interview stakeholders, and then hopefully within the first year, at the end of the first year, we'll be implementing some of the components of that plan. So what are the desired outcomes of that? Residents know what neighborhood they live in, and we can benchmark that by surveys. Residents have a sense of connection to their neighborhood, again, which then creates more community pride, neighborhood pride, all the benefits that come along with that. Increased neighbor-to-neighbor assistance, increased number of neighborhood-based events like national night outs, block parties, holiday decorating competitions, things like that. Increased resident participation in citywide events, so you can just look at overall numbers. And by the way, if you're not getting this, these are the metrics that we would use to evaluate success. How many people participate, new people participate in public policy discussions, resident ownership in the concerns of their neighborhood, so neighborhood watches, neighborhood cleanups, beautification projects. And then just city resource preservation. Again, could we see a reduced number of code violations as a result of this? Reduce crime, property value retention, improve public policy through increased resident participation. So those would be some of the ways that we would benchmark success if we move forward with this.
All right, I think Mayor Pro Tem was up first.
So what department would this fall in?
That's a great question, Mayor Pro Tem Russell. I was just talking to Interim Deputy City Manager Hargrove today, and we think that it would be appropriate for this to start out in the City Manager's office, but I can see that, after a couple of years, if we want to continue that it would move probably into community development as a program or service from that department. But we really think that this would be, an important focus and something that the Deputy City Manager, the full-time Deputy City Manager, would really want to have a lot of oversight in the first year.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Wink.
Thanks, Mayor. I really love these ideas that all support the building of the social capital and other forms of capital around our community. And I think what I love the most about this idea is the augmented security factor. It's a positive way for neighbors to engage in facilitated communication among a group that now knows they are a group. I say positive because certain online forums can get a little skewed in terms of, baseline positive thought and progress in terms of problem solving, but I love this idea, and I love it that you're considering schools, the locations and history of schools, just general history, the parks, the development of Englewood. And it is great that Member Barentine mentioned what she mentioned. So yeah, some of us already know about some of the identification pieces around town, but it'll be great to collaborate and consolidate all of that knowledge into these neighborhoods. And also, what would go well with it, maybe it's assumed, is the wayfinding and placemaking, of course, as occurs currently in Arapahoe Acres. It's so lovely. So thank you for this work.
Next is Member Martinez.
Thank you for these suggestions. I also love these suggestions. It encompasses a lot of what we've talked about over the last couple years in terms of what people love about our community, and it's like really embracing the things that people love, but also taking a proactive approach and making sure we make those things bigger and bolder and more secure and more formalized in our community, because it doesn't just happen on its own. You have to be intentional with them to keep those things intact. So I love that, and it brings together all the things, neighbors meeting neighbors, which is so important in terms of everything else, safety, security, beautification, all of those things. So I love this and look forward to seeing what this flourishes.
Any other comments? I like all these ideas. It looks to me like the first three are to contribute to some sense of pride and sense of community placemaking. So the first three, and then the next two, the last two, really have to do with preparing sort of the way for those things, because you can't, I mean, if you have white weeds and people are mad at each other, it's pretty hard to to really like your neighbor and go to a party or whatever, or the city. And then the homeless camp abatement also is another sort of paving the way for then a higher level of engagement. So I can see these all fitting. I do have a question about mediation. I've wondered over the years about what our opportunities are for when we do have really serious neighbor-to-neighbor sorts of anger, and if there's a possibility for some more mediation in one of these roles, but maybe that's not right for the resource coordinator, but I also think there are times where we need to call on someone to help people just kind of work it out, or offer it anyway. So I don't know where that would fall. So I don't know if you got enough, did you put yours back on and I didn't hear it? Okay, sorry, I just want to make sure. Do you have enough to go on with these? I mean, I didn't hear huge outrage against any questions to maybe flesh them out a bit. If it is net neutral, you think? So otherwise, I'd go back to the HR 200,000, or I want to see more alleys done myself, because I really think it would make a difference for people. It's another sort of paving the way on priorities in my mind, but I haven't heard anyone else chime in on that. But Member Cuesta.
Glad that you mentioned the Historic Preservation Society, because they're doing some work now on identifying these neighborhoods and getting that information out there. So I think that they might be a good resource as well. I would be willing to roll the dice on the audio-video system next door. If we can, I think you said we're getting 20% of the alleys now. If we put another 200,000 towards it, which could be that 200,000 from next door to upgrade audio video, that gets us to maybe 50. Even if we got it 50%, even if we got it to 40%, if we could double that, I'd rather improve alleys than, I guess I'd rather take the risk on that and improve a few more alleys, would be my thought on it. Thank you.
Councilmember Martinez.
I would concur with that. I brought it up at the last time we talked about it. I think we can hold off on the audiovisual in the council chambers. I think alley improvements impact more of the community than our recording our council meetings do. We still have action minutes. People can still come if they want to. I think the alleys would be a bigger priority for the majority of our citizens, and I've been talking about the importance of alley beautification for some time now. I think it really it would really improve the quality of life for a lot more folks in our community than recording a council meeting.
So I just want to make sure that this would not preclude that we wouldn't be not council recording council meetings. What we're talking about in there is an upgrade to a system. It's not going to change what happened tonight, I don't think. At least that's what I've been told. So if that's incorrect, then and we need to do that in order for tonight not to happen, then let's talk about that. But I've gotten the impression that no, that's not what that's about.
Your understanding is correct.
Okay, great.
I just want to make a clarification. I wasn't suggesting we stop recording the council
No.
meetings. I was just saying if that system fails and it goes down, it would not be the end of the world.
Well, it's not that system that, well, I guess so. You're right. Yeah, good. And yes, I knew someone had brought up alleys, but I couldn't remember who. It was you at that meeting. I was on the phone, so I wasn't always clear about who.
Well, the alley is beautification. I've been talking about
I know,
for a
you've
long
been
time.
talking
I've
for
never
years.
been able to really get it off the ground, even before I was on council.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay, Councilmember Berenstein and then Sierra.
I just want to have that clarification more, and I'm not sure that Councilmember Martinez is meaning it the way that it's coming across. It would be the end of the world to not have it recorded, because people, that's a priority. That's a legal priority that we have, to make sure that people are informed and have a record of the meetings. And since we've gone to that, away from verbatim minutes and to that is extremely important, because that's the working of their government and how they get information. But you did clarify it in that we're not talking about not recording it, and we would certainly take other steps to go ahead and make sure that a recording was happening. We'd just do it in another room, or we wouldn't not do our obligation, because that is extremely important, and it's the documentation that we have. So I just want to make sure that we're not even considering doing one over the other. It's just, okay, yeah, because it would be.
Councilmember Sierra.
I think Member Martinez did clarify her point. So I too would want to focus on the alleys. Obviously, we can't have a repeat of what happened last winter. So if we do have the ability to improve more of the alleys in the next budget cycle, then I'm definitely for that as well.
Councilmember Wink.
I'll be quick. Thank you, Member Martinez, for your thoughts and your clarification. And Mr. Cuesta, I think this is a fantastic way to solve problems and move forward. And so I'm behind what he suggested as well. I think it's a great compromise in managing the alley situation and still leaving us the ability to look at these or to move forward with these new recommendations and hit on one of our big pain points.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. I am about taking care of the alleys, but also the suggestion that I heard the city manager say was that we can put it off for a while, but if it goes down, we still would have to fix it. Is that correct? So what are we going to do? How are we going to provide for that contingency if we spend the money in the alleys?
Go ahead if you want to answer.
Mayor Pro Tem, that's a great question. So that would probably come either from the contingency fund, which we have put some more money into as part of this presentation compared to the contingency we already were planning for. We've put another $100,000 into contingency. We could also, if it was really more expensive than what we're estimating, we could also, of course, use unassigned fund balance for that.
Which I think is a great use of unassigned fund balance. Your light is on again. Do you want to? No more? Okay. Great. You got enough direction? Super. Anything else? Finish this out.
So to finish this up, I just wanted to make sure that everybody is aware these costs are included in the balanced budget.
Yes.
I think that you knew that, but I just want to make sure that you know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a good reminder.
It's a lot of information.
Yeah, it's great though. You've done a great job presenting it.
So can we move forward? We have a few more items?
We do.
Okay. So I wanted to make sure that we included a list of the items that were actually funded in our list. Or in our balanced budget. We originally met on May 11th, and we talked a lot about the department priorities. And so in the next several slides, it outlines what items were removed, the items that we talked about earlier, or were reduced from the original budget request. And I have outlined in red, this is actually, if we go back to our August 5th discussion, we included this list in the deck as well. And we had talked about it earlier in May. This just actually shows what is actually included, or what has been reduced, or what has been removed. And this is where you can see actually the positions that are being requested that are still in are part of the budget. So I don't know that we need to go through each one. I just wanted to make sure that you knew that this existed so that you can see that. All right, so with that, we can conclude this part of the conversation. Our budget is balanced, but we do continue to face challenges. A couple of these I've mentioned. We've talked that we do lack revenue diversity, and we do, because we are so dependent on sales and use tax, that we do require a strong retail support in Englewood in order to support our budget. Again, the proposed 7% sewer utility rate, this isn't general fund related, but I wanted to make sure that we kept in mind that that was the only proposed rate and fee, and it won't support ongoing capital maintenance and operations needs. Our healthcare premiums, this is something that I mentioned. The negotiated discussions, or the discussions that we're having with the vendors, do include caps for 2021 and 2022. However, there are additional increases included in those caps. Also, we have the challenge of our community, right, and their expectations regarding the levels of service, and we need to make sure that we balance that with our existing resources and available funding. So that concludes our presentation for tonight. Again, I've talked about the dates moving forward, but I also did want to let you know that the budget book is now online at englewoodco.gov, which I'm very excited about, in the Spotlight section. And the revenue manual and the South Platte budget book are also included. And then the line item budget was updated on OpenGov that reflects what we've presented tonight. It was uploaded on Friday as well to OpenGov. So you do have those resources. We do have paper copies of the revenue manual in South Platte, and we have 4 copies of the budget book as well. So with that, I'll leave it up to more questions and conclusion.
Congratulations on getting it posted before midnight. Mayor Pro Tem had her light on.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And I'm really thankful for the staff and the hard work that they've done to balance the budget, because I feel like since I've been on council, this is the first time there's been a balanced budget. We were always using the beginning fund balance in order to balance the budget, and I feel like this is legitimate. I do have a concern. We are, in our budget, we are including full-time employees at the managerial level. And the concern that I have is in 2014, Public Works laid off 12.3 employees, I believe, mostly by attrition, whether they retired or whether they moved on. And a lot of those were worker bees. And I believe that part of the reason that Director DeAndrea has said that the reason we've left things undone is because we don't have the employees to accomplish it. And so I'm concerned that we're loading top-heavy employees and not the worker bee employees that we would need, especially in the Public Works Department. That is one thing. The other thing that the proposed 7% sewer utility rate increase, I really would like for this council to start looking at increasing tap fees and other things to generate revenue rather than to continually go. And I mean, this could be part of the rate study, but I think it's something that perhaps council needs to talk about before we begin raising fees. And I know that we are very heavily dependent on sales tax, but most home rule municipalities are. I've kind of noticed that in the 4 years I've been on council, the amount of sales tax has dropped significantly. I think it was closer to 69% before, and so I don't know if that's because we're losing businesses or what's going on. But as far as the sales tax and being heavily dependent on it, I believe that another thing that we need to do as a council and as a city is to become more business friendly and generate more clientele that will help bolster the sales tax revenue. So I think those are just things I would like to consider. But I am very thankful that we are presenting, or you have presented, a balanced budget. Thank you very much.
Any other comments? I'd like to piggyback on the question Mayor Pro Tem Russell raised, and that's about retail and generating sales tax. There was a a study, I believe, that Manager Keck did at some point saying that we were over-retailed. And if that is in our document still, I think it might have been 3 years ago or so, maybe 4, that actually we needed more rooftops to support the number of retail that we have. And I don't know who did that and what the management of it was, but, and perhaps there's different perspectives on it, but I would like to know if that's still true, if it's not, where we headed with it. It seems to me like there's different kinds of retail that generates differently kinds of, services, massage places, or this kind of, something that doesn't get taxed certainly offsets some of those things. So, Councilmember Martinez, and then Councilmember Sierra.
Thank you. I also want to thank staff for all the hard work. I know so much work goes into this, and thanks for providing it all. And I really liked the chart we have of what we're keeping in and what we're not. I think that's a good reminder of all the discussions that have taken place. And also just want to really reiterate that I really appreciate the proactive steps that we're taking with the new positions and the new programs to really look forward into the future with the asset management and the several employees that we're adding. I think it's really going to set us up for a better future. So thank you.
Councilmember Sierra.
Just a clarification or just correction. I'm not sure, because I know Mayor Pro Tem was using percentages in terms of sales tax, but the sales tax dollars have actually been increasing, the sales and use tax dollars. It was 24.8 million in 2014. At the end of 2018, it was 28.9 million, so just under 29 million. But I know you were using percentages, so I guess percentages in terms of the general fund, maybe that's what you meant, but I know that sales taxes are actually going up. I do want to thank staff as well in terms of all the work that they did on the budget. It was, to me, in terms of just understanding, maybe it's because it's my second year going through the budget cycle, but just understanding where it was going and what the expenses were going towards. I thought it was just the discussions throughout the entire year have been great. So, and in terms of a hard copy, I would prefer a hard copy. I'm not sure. I can wait till tomorrow if need be, but if no one's going to take one tonight, I'll definitely take it.
Thank you. Councilmember Barentine.
I do appreciate Councilmember Sierra's point, because when you're working with that percentage, actually what it's showing is we are less dependent on sales tax, because the sales tax is going up. It's just a smaller percentage of the whole. So we're already accomplishing some of that in some ways, and I would like one of the books. Probably not a big surprise that I would want a hard copy, but.
Let's keep going around for that question. Councilmember Martinez, do you want a hard copy?
I do not need one tonight. Thank you.
But will you want one before we get to the budget night, the hearing night?
No.
Okay, Councilmember Wink.
I don't need one before, no.
But would you like one at all, is what?
Yes,
I mean,
at all.
at the end, we'll do the final one, but do you want the preliminary
Post.
one or not? We always have had it.
No.
Just so you know.
No.
Okay. Councilmember Questa.
you.
I'm okay for proposed electronically, but certainly paper once we get to final. Thank you.
Okay.
Great.
Mayor Pro Tem.
I would like a paper copy, please.
All right. I think we've got enough to go around for tonight then.
And you'd like
Yeah.
one as well?
I think I want one because people refer back to pages so much, and
Great.
it's hard to be up there leading and doing it and moving this. So,
Can I make
Yeah,
one more
go
comment?
ahead.
So next week, we have the public hearing, and we have had some questions that were asked. What I'd like to propose is that I include responses to those questions in the council communication, so we're very clear. Is
that would
good?
be great, because then that can be part of it. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Great. Thank you so much. We move on to council members' choice. Who would like to kick us off? All right, I'll start. All right, Councilmember Sierra.
I guess I'll start off. My first two are actually council requests for the city or Madam Attorney. So actually, I would like to get some alternative language. I know this has been brought up by Chair Bowden, and apologies for just misremembering your name, but Chair Bowden, in terms of the governing legislation for CEAC, after last week's presentation from Supervisor Lewis, he did mention some aspects that fall under the purview of code enforcement that potentially is not included within the wording of, I don't have the legislation in front of me, I think it's .3A, something along those lines, but it listed out all the different chapters within Title 15, but obviously there are other titles that are affected or that code enforcement enforces that are not under that title. So I know that last week during the conversation that we had with Officer Lewis and code enforcement, he listed out specific items. So if we could just get some clarity in terms of the wording that may potentially that we can use in order for CEAC is to be the most effective, I would like that.
Can you turn this on? Thank you.
Do you want that to go in, do you want that to go into the packet?
Do we know when it's going to be coming? Well, it should go into the packet, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And then secondly, I think all of council received an email this morning, and I know I received a second one, but there was a citizens that basically wanted us to get involved with situations that are currently going through the municipal court system. I don't feel comfortable answering them. I know that we're not supposed to get involved once it starts going through the process. So if there's any way that you can recommend some type of language or some type of email to say, yes, we did receive it, but we're not, it's got to go through the whole due process aspect of it. So if we could get some wording that we could reply back that doesn't put us into any kind of legal bind, I would appreciate it.
Thank you. Is that all?
No, there's still more.
Okay.
And
keep
then
going. Keep going.
I'm not done yet. No, but I want to thank
Councilmember Barrington, I'll let you follow up with the same thing. That's fine.
So, and then I just want to thank everybody that came out for Be a Tool this past Saturday, and everybody involved. I know, Mary, you said a few words at the beginning. City Manager Lewis, we saw you there as well. But just Tony Arnaldi, the entire staff, everyone that put something together. I got to meet some new neighbors, and it's just a great event. Just seeing everybody involved. There were kids at our site. They were playing around, looking for snakes, finding snake skins. The entire process was actually pretty cool. So I was out there a good 8 hours. I think we went till past 5 o'clock that day. So we were there pretty late, but it was still a good time. Everybody was great within the team. So I just had a fun time. This is my second year doing it. So yeah, just another great community building event. And actually, I'll mention the last one. So lastly, I'm going to be going to the ETAC meeting this Thursday, and there's actually something pretty important to me that's going to be on the agenda, and that's the Idaho Stop Rule. As many of you know, I'm a cyclist, and I've always felt that we needed to do more in order to improve the safety of cyclists and any type of pedestrian within the city. Obviously, we had a death here in Englewood to a cyclist off of Downing and Dartmouth, or just north of Dartmouth last year. And unfortunately, I had a friend that actually was hit by a car last week. She's fine, but it was a hit and run situation. Mayor, we talked, you experienced something similar with the student. So I'm just looking for ways to improve the safety of the citizens here in Englewood, and I feel that based on the metrics that are available, the Idaho Stop would allow that. But they're gonna be discussing it. I'm gonna be there and giving my 2 cents on it. And so just wanted to make everybody aware that that's going to be on the agenda. And that is it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Barrington. Did you want to follow up on what? Councilmember Wink, your light is on. Did you mean for?
No report.
Okay. Councilmember Martinez.
Yeah, just want to remind folks that we have the final household hazardous waste event this coming Saturday. 8 to 2 at the service center. So if you have stuff to get rid of, come get rid of it. Yes, it's at the service center. It's 2800 South Platte River Drive, I believe.
Yep.
It's near there.
You'll see signs, right? If you drive down there, I think they put up a sign. Yeah.
It's really
Anything further?
no, that's it.
Thank you. Council.
Yeah, we could use some signage. Yeah.
All right. Councilmember Barrington.
I want to make sure that any of the reports that are coming from citizens to us, that we're not encouraging ever any censorship. So we're going to see them if it comes forward. The other clarification, so I don't object to maybe what he's asking for, but there's no way to censor what's coming into council. They send their stuff. So, but there were policy questions that I was very disturbed with that were kind of embedded in the in-between lines, and I think I'd prefer to go, since we happen to be meeting tomorrow, I would prefer to go over that with you privately. So I've changed my mind. I would not want to make a public comment about what my concerns are right now.
Is that, your council, you're done with your council members' choice time? Okay, great. Mayor Pro Tem, and then Mayor Cuesta.
The only thing I have is, Councilmember Sierra reminded me to the alternative language. I would like to see some alternative language suggested to enable the Code Enforcement Advisory Committee to engage those areas of the code that the code enforcement addresses. Thank you.
Member Cuesta.
Thank you, Mayor. And my question may be for you, City Manager Lewis, and it's regarding the portal. You sent out, I guess I'd call it a prototype almost of the portal, and I'm trying to understand exactly what that would be used for. It looked like at a minimum it would be a repository to where council members could place documents into this central portal, and then other council members could see it. Is that open to the public as well?
Mayor, Councilmember Cuesta, the portal as currently developed is not open to the public. So we did get contacted the company that we were trying to use to do that, and they responded today that there is not a way to do that. So what we think, well, we may be going back to the drawing board on the tool that we showed you and just make it more web-based. The problem is it's really, it's kind of tricky to do that from a webmaster kind of standpoint, but we're going to be looking at that. The other alternative is just put a kind of a duplicate copy of what's on the portal, that it's kind of copied onto, you know, a page onto the city website. But it's just, yeah, where you would actually upload would be on the portal. I don't know if does that make sense?
It does. So the intention, though, although it's not there yet, is to have that accessible by public as well, or that the public can see whatever documents are placed into there. That was the first component of it, is more just council members are placing documents there. Secondarily, is that supposed to serve as a communication tool? Is there a place for a council member to comment on a particular documents as well?
That's a good question. I don't know. And actually, Mayor Olson, this is all kind of a result of you guys talking about this in Mayor Olson. So we can actually make it whatever you want. You can see we've added a lot of kind of links and additional information that you didn't ask for, but we think you might could use. So we can have a comment form too.
My thought was that was one of the built-in features of it. I was apprehensive about that feature. I mean, it seems to me it's not only that people are looking for documents to be placed somewhere, but also a further conversation on documents. In you know, kind of a centralized place like that, I wasn't sure if that was going to be a built-in feature. If it's not, and maybe we can say it was placed in there last week, everybody reference it, we'll talk about it at the next meeting. It seemed like the portal was starting to become live or getting close to live, and so I just wasn't sure exactly what the parameters of the portal were, and really what the goal of it is, what the function was, public visibility, et cetera. And maybe that's a conversation for a different time when we get closer to having it ready for release. But you sending the email on it, and I can't find the email now, but it seemed like it was in the past week. It just kind of piqued my curiosity on it.
Last Friday, I think. Yeah, and I would be a little hesitant to have kind of a council forum. I think that would violate probably open meetings. But, I mean, where you could comment necessarily back and forth. But what I do think it could be is a portal also, not only for just emails that you receive that you want to share, but also the council requests could potentially go through there. You could always still send them to Krista or myself, and we could, you know, have those loaded. But so that you have kind of a live place as they come in of what's come in before we send them out on Thursday afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I'm going to build off of that. I intended it to be a place to send council requests, an easier way than to send it out to 3 or 4 of us, or, you know, and violating some of the comments that have gone on, and make sure that it's out there. But I do think it requires us to say, I want this to be a council request. It can't be sort of, you know, veiled in it, which I think has happened as well, and then staff didn't know it was meant to be a council request. So I would not be in favor of a forum of any form. I think it would be antithetical to why we're doing it. So that would not be my choice, but I suppose we can meet with the city attorney to ask what is the best way to use it. I have a few things. First of all, I wanted to thank our city manager for this great Friday update email that you give us every week. It's really nice. We were chatting a little bit with you earlier, but I I just really appreciate the updates and the kind of information you're getting from your different directors to keep us informed. It's very helpful. Saturday really was an amazing event for Be a Tool. Again, thanks to Tony and the folks from the neighborhood rehab, and it really was a fun day. And you did the house, didn't you? You painted the house? No, you did the other big project. Half the house. So there was a house that 2 women needed to be painted because they're going to lose their insurance, and it needs to be painted by the end of this month. And the Craig Hospital folks had 27, 30 people come as a team, and they got a lot. I think they finished the house, didn't they? The entire house. It's a big house. So we may have helped 2 sisters stay in their house. It's amazing. So very fun day and lots of interaction with great neighbors and folks that care about the city. And then the last thing is we have a trash talk this week, right? Another one on Thursday night, is that right? And it's next week. I think I have it on the wrong date on my calendar. So heads up, 2 weeks, September 26th. And is that time still the same? Is it a 5 to 7 open house style, right? Yeah, okay, great.
Are the people that signed up being notified? How are they doing that? Because I just had a complaint that people didn't think they were getting communicated enough with. How are we reaching out for that?
All right, well, we'll get more information on that and make sure that everybody's, remember, Questa, did you have her light on for more? Oh, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure she put hers on, and I thought you might have too, and I thought, okay, well, we'll go back to discussion. All right, City Manager.
No report.
City Attorney.
No report.
Yeah, this meeting is adjourned.